Silence came first, not the kind that comforts, the kind that watches. Before the galaxy learned to fear the name Darth Traya, she existed as something smaller, quieter, uncertain. She was not born screaming into the Force, not like others. There was no sudden flare, no moment where the Jedi paused and turned their heads. She was simply there, a child among stone halls and distant echoes, breathing in a place that did not breathe back. The Jedi Temple did not feel cold. It felt empty. Footsteps passed her every day. Robes brushed the floor. Voices murmured lessons older than memory. And yet, no one truly saw her. She learned early how to sit still, how to listen without reacting, how to make her presence small. Other children spoke of the Force with certainty. They felt it as warmth, as guidance, as comfort. She did not. When the instructors spoke of balance, she listened. When they spoke of harmony, she remembered the pauses between their words. Those pauses mattered. Meditation was meant to bring peace. But peace never came. Instead, questions did. They arrived slowly, softly, without anger. Why did the Force choose some and ignore others? Why did it whisper to some minds but remain silent in hers? She did not ask aloud. She learned that questions made masters uncomfortable. She learned that doubt was treated like weakness. So she learned to hide it. The Force was everywhere, they said, binding life, guiding destiny. But when she reached for it, there was distance, not absence. Distance, as if something stood between her and certainty. She watched the other younglings during training, and how their blades moved with confidence, how their emotions were corrected, shaped, softened. She copied them, perfected the motions, learned the forms. On the outside, she was disciplined, focused, quietly impressive. Inside, she was listening to the moments when the Force did not answer. At night, when the temple dimmed and the corridors emptied, she remained awake, not restless, observant. The temple spoke in echoes, in memories pressed into stone. She felt those echoes more clearly than the Force itself. The Jedi taught that the Force was truth, that it revealed meaning. But meaning did not reveal itself to her. Only patterns did. She noticed how masters avoided certain histories, how some wars were mentioned only in fragments, how failure was always blamed on emotion, never doctrine. That mattered too. She was not angry at the Jedi, not yet. She respected them. She followed their rules. But respect did not erase doubt. As she grew older, her silence deepened. Her discipline sharpened. The council began to notice her restraint, her control. They mistook it for faith. No one asked what she believed. And she never volunteered the answer. Because she did not know. She believed in learning, in understanding consequences, in listening longer than others were willing to speak. But belief in the Force itself remained unfinished. It did not comfort her. It observed her. That feeling never left. Even when she passed her trials, even when she stood where children once stood and spoke the same lessons back to them, the doubt stayed, not as fear, not as defiance, as patience, not as kind as the Jedi claimed, and one not as kind as the Jedi claimed. And one day, that quiet realization would matter more than any blade she ever held. The temple taught structure, not belief. Structure came first. Belief was assumed. The halls were wide, the ceilings high. Stone carried memory, and memory carried rules. She learned to walk slowly, to speak less, to listen more. The Jedi called it discipline. She called it survival. Lessons arrived every morning, spoken calmly, repeated endlessly. Balance, control, let go. The words never changed. Only the faces did. Masters spoke with certainty, as if doubt had never touched them, as if the Force had always answered. She watched their eyes. Her meditation was meant to bring peace. She always noticed. Meditation was meant to bring peace. She sat perfectly still, breath steady, mind quiet. Yet peace did not arrive. Questions did. Why did the Force choose silence here? Why did it guide some lives so clearly? Why did it abandon others? She did not speak these thoughts. She learned silence early. Silence was rewarded. Silence was praised. Other students spoke of warmth, of connection, of purpose. They smiled when they spoke. She listened. She remembered their words, but she did not feel them. The Force felt distant, present, but unreachable, like a star seen through fog. Training followed routine, forms practiced endlessly, movements corrected, her mistakes erased. She learned quickly, too quickly. Masters nodded in approval. They mistook control for faith. She never corrected them. Faith was never required, only obedience. At night, the temple changed. Lights dimmed, footsteps faded. Stone echoed softly. She stayed awake, not restless, aware. She felt history more than the Force. Old battles, old grief, pressed into walls. The Force remained quiet, observing, measuring, never comforting. She realized something then. The Jedi trusted the Force absolutely. They never questioned it. They obeyed it. She did not openly, but inwardly. The Force claimed balance, yet imbalance filled history. The Force claimed harmony, yet war returned again and again. Patterns mattered. Outcomes mattered. Intent mattered less than consequence. No master spoke of that. She kept listening. Her years passed this way. Her name rose quietly. Model student, disciplined mind, unshaken calm. Inside, the fracture widened, slowly, silently. Not pain, not anger. Understanding beginning to form. The Force was powerful, ancient, indifferent. It shaped lives without consent. It demanded faith without explanation. She remembered that. She would always remember that. This was not rebellion, not yet. It was preparation. The temple never noticed, and the Force never warned them. Doubt did not arrive suddenly. It stayed, quiet, persistent, like a shadow that learned her shape. As years passed, the temple praised her calm. They trusted her restraint. They spoke her name with approval. She accepted it without pride. Approval meant little. Understanding meant everything. The Force still answered others. Visions, feelings, certainty. A Jedi taught surrender. Let go. Trust the Jedi taught surrender. Let go. Trust the Force. She tried, again and again. Each time, something resisted. Not fear, awareness. She felt the Force move lives like pieces, pushing, pulling, correcting outcomes without asking permission. Wars ended, wars began again. The Force endured, people did not. This pattern troubled her, deeply. The Jedi blamed emotion, attachment, pride, fear. They never blamed the Force. She wondered why. Meditation grew longer, silence thicker, questions sharper. She noticed how often masters said, "This is the will of the Force," as if that ended discussion, as if will replaced responsibility. She did not argue. She remembered every lesson, every omission, and every convenient silence. Students came to her for guidance. She spoke carefully. She taught them to think, to examine cause and consequence, not just obedience. Some listened too closely. That worried the council. They sensed deviation, not darkness, deviation. The Force did not correct her. It allowed her teaching, watched, measured. She began to understand something painful. The Force did not care about intention, only outcome. Lives were tools. Sacrifice was expected. Suffering was acceptable, as long as balance returned. This thought frightened her, not because it was dark, because it felt true. She looked back at history, endless cycles. Jedi rise, Sith fall, Sith rise, Jedi fall. The Force remained, unchanged, untouched. It fed on conflict. Balance born from destruction. Destruction justified by balance. She did not hate the Force, and not yet. She respected its power. She feared its indifference. At night, she walked alone, corridors empty, stars distant. She felt smaller than ever, not insignificant, replaceable. The realization settled slowly. The Force did not need her, or anyone. That frightened her more than death. If the Force could discard lives so easily, what meaning did belief hold? The Jedi never answered this. They could not. Their faith depended on silence. Her doubt grew heavier, still quiet, still controlled, still hidden, but no longer patient. She understood now. Doubt was not weakness. It was clarity forming, a fracture widening. One day, it would break something. She did not know what, only that the Force itself stood on the other side. And when that moment came, the galaxy would learn the cost of unanswered questions. Unchanged. Lessons repeated. Rituals unchanged. Lessons repeated. Rituals endured. The Jedi believed consistency was strength. She began to see it as avoidance. The Force still flowed through the halls, strong, ever present. Yet it felt less like guidance now, more like gravity, inescapable, demanding obedience. She realized something quietly. The Jedi did not serve the Force. They surrendered to it. There was a difference. Surrender removed choice. Choice created responsibility. The Force never took responsibility. It acted, and others suffered. This understanding did not make her angry. It made her careful. Careful with words. Careful with students. Careful with herself. As she refined her teachings, she spoke of consequence, of awareness, of thinking beyond instruction. Never openly against the Jedi. Never against the Force. Only beside it. That was enough to be dangerous. The council sensed distance, not corruption. Distance. They watched her more closely. They mistook her restraint for loyalty. She allowed the mistake. Her connection to the Force weakened slightly. Not severed, loosened. She felt lighter and more alone. The Force noticed. She could feel that. A subtle pressure. A reminder. She did not respond. For the first time, she chose silence deliberately. That choice mattered. She reflected on the youngling she had been. Quiet, observant, unseen. Nothing had changed. Everything had. The Force had shaped her path without asking. Now she questioned whether it deserved trust. And that question was the true fracture. It spread slowly, through thought, through memory, through every lesson she re-examined. She saw how often the Jedi excused tragedy, how often they said balance required loss, how easily they accepted suffering as necessary. Necessary for whom? The Force never answered. That silence confirmed everything. She understood now. The Force was not evil, but it was not moral. It did not love. It did not choose. It simply was. And beings like her paid the price. This realization settled deep. It did not rush. It waited, like something preparing to surface. She still wore Jedi robes, still followed the order, still taught discipline and calm. But inwardly, something had shifted. She no longer trusted what guided them all. The fracture widened, not outwardly, internally, invisible, unstoppable. And she did not know where this path would lead. She did not yet name her defiance. She only knew this. If the Force demanded obedience without understanding, then understanding would have to come from somewhere else. That decision was quiet, but final. Long before she would be called Darth Traya, she became something far more dangerous. A Jedi who no longer believed the Force was beyond question. And once that belief breaks, nothing ever truly heals again. She did not seek the role. It arrived quietly. A title spoken in calm voices. Jedi Master, Teacher, Guide. The temple trusted her now. They placed students before her. Young minds, unformed, listening. She stood where her own questions had begun. Not proud, not hesitant, aware. Her presence was different. Still calm, still restrained, but heavier. Responsibility changes silence. Lessons began as they always had. Balance, control, let go. She repeated the words, carefully, slowly, but she watched reactions. She watched understanding form or fail. She noticed when students memorized answers and when they understood meaning. That difference mattered. She did not raise her voice, never rushed a thought. She allowed pauses, long ones, pauses the temple disliked. In those pauses, students spoke, and not loudly, honestly. Questions surfaced, small ones at first. Why must emotion be feared? Why is obedience called peace? She did not answer directly. She never contradicted doctrine. She asked questions back. What follows this choice? Who suffers from that decision? Does the Force explain itself? Students listened. Some became uncomfortable. Some became awake. Awareness spreads quietly. The council noticed changes, not corruption, curiosity. They watched her from a distance. They called her wise. With caution, her reputation grew. Calm master, measured teacher. Students trusted her because she listened, because she never dismissed doubt. She never encouraged rebellion, only understanding. The Force remained present, strong, unquestioned by most. She felt it less now, not weaker, less intimate, as if space had formed, but also blindness. She never spoke these, but also blindness. She never spoke these thoughts aloud, Not yet. She refined her teachings. Subtle, careful. She taught restraint, but not silence. She taught control, but not surrender. That distinction mattered. Some students thrived, others struggled. Those who struggled were watched. Questioning was not forbidden, but it was remembered. The council preferred predictable minds. Predictability meant safety. She understood their fear. She did not share it. History weighed heavily on her thoughts. Wars born from certainty, failures hidden behind belief. She taught students to read history fully, not just approved lessons. That was dangerous. She felt it. The Force did not intervene, and it observed, as it always had. She realized something painful. The Jedi Order feared independent minds, not because they led to darkness, but because they could not be controlled. She became careful again, not fearful, strategic. Her words softened, her pauses lengthened. Students learned to listen deeper, to think longer, to doubt quietly. The fracture widened, still invisible, still internal. She did not know yet. But this was the moment when she stopped being only a student of the Force and became its observer. That was the first true step toward everything she would become. She sensed the change before anyone named it. Whispers traveled faster than concern. A master who asked too much. A teacher who allowed pauses. The council listened, quietly. They always did. Her lessons spread differently, not loudly, not openly, and that distinction unsettled them. The order was wrong. She never denied its power. She only refused to treat it as flawless. That distinction unsettled them. The order survived on certainty. Certainty calmed fear. Fear protected control. Her words loosened that chain. Students returned from her chambers changed, not defiant, aware. They asked why some histories were hidden, why some failures were softened, why balance always required sacrifice. Masters corrected them gently, too gently. Concern followed. Meetings were held without her. Decisions made in silence. She felt the distance growing. Not emotional, political. The council did not accuse. They observed. Observation was more dangerous. They believed patience would correct deviation. The Force would realign her, and it did not. She continued teaching restraint, but also responsibility, choice, consequence. She reminded students that actions mattered more than intent, that belief did not erase outcome, that the Force did not carry guilt for suffering. Those words lingered, too long. The council feared implication. If the Force could be questioned, then obedience lost meaning. She was summoned more often, asked to explain, to clarify, to soften. She complied carefully, never lying, never revealing too much. They asked if she trusted the Force. She answered truthfully, "I observe it." That answer stayed with them. The Jedi believed trust meant surrender. Observation suggested judgment. Judgment implied choice. Choice threatened order. Her peers avoided discussion. Some respected her, others feared association. She noticed isolation forming, not exile, and preparation. The Force remained distant, present, unresponsive. She no longer expected guidance, only confirmation. The council debated quietly. They recalled old schisms, old wars, ideas that fractured the order before. Independent thought had consequences. History proved that. They decided caution was wisdom, They limited her influence. Subtly, students reassigned, lessons reviewed, oversight increased. She accepted it. Resistance would confirm suspicion. Patience allowed clarity. Her students sensed change. Some withdrew. Some remained loyal. Those who remained learned carefully, quietly. She warned them never to challenge openly, never to seek conflict, only understanding. That frightened the council more. Understanding could not be controlled. One night, she walked the halls again, as she always had. Stone, echo, memory. The temple felt heavier now, watching her, measuring her. She realized then, the Order did not fear darkness. It feared loss of certainty, and certainty was its true foundation. She did not hate them for it. Fear explains much. She felt something settle inside her, a line crossed without sound. She would not change her path, even if the Order turned away, even if the Force remained silent. This was not rebellion. It was inevitability. The seeds had already been planted, and the council knew it. They began coming to her quietly, not as rebels, as seekers. Students who felt something missing, students who sensed the Force but did not understand it. She never gathered them, she never called. They arrived on their own, one by one. Questions followed them, not dangerous ones, honest ones. Why does the Force allow this? Why must sacrifice always be praised? Why does history repeat? She listened. That was her first lesson. Listening creates space. Space allows thought. Thought creates responsibility. She taught them slowly, never in absolutes, never in commands. She asked them to trace consequences, to follow actions forward, to see who paid the price, not who claimed victory. Some students struggled. Thinking was harder than obedience. Others changed. Subtly, they grew quieter, more aware, less certain. Certainty had always been the Jedi's armor. She taught them to remove it, just for a moment, to feel exposed. That exposure mattered. The council noticed patterns. The same students, the same questions, the same calm defiance. They did not accuse her. They blamed influence. Influence was easier to correct. They spoke of limits, of balance, of tradition. That she agreed publicly. Privately, she continued. Because stopping now would be dishonest. Dishonesty was worse than exile. The Force remained distant, not weakened, unconcerned. She stopped expecting anything from it. Expectation creates disappointment. She chose clarity instead. Her students sensed her distance. They mistook it for wisdom. She did not correct them. Wisdom and distance often look the same. She warned them. Never challenge the Order directly. Never seek to overturn doctrine. Understand first. Understanding changes everything. Some students left her guidance. They returned to certainty. She did not judge them. Certainty is comforting. Others stayed. Those students would be remembered later. Not kindly. The council feared outcomes. Independent minds lead to schism. Schism leads to war. War scars the Force itself. They believed control prevented catastrophe. She believed blindness invited it. Neither side spoke these thoughts aloud. Silence grew heavy. Trust eroded. Oversight increased. She felt watched, not threatened, measured. The Force mirrored the council, watching, waiting. She wondered if the Force approved. Then she realized. Approval was irrelevant. The Force did not judge by morality, only by result. That understanding chilled her. Her students sensed it. They felt weight in her words. Not darkness. Gravity. History moved under gravity. Not belief. One evening, a student asked quietly, "Master, can the Force be wrong?" She did not answer. She asked instead, "Can it be questioned?" The student understood. That moment sealed her fate. The council learned of it days later. They said nothing, but decisions were made. Assignments shifted. Her permissions narrowed. Influence reduced. She accepted every change calmly. Resistance would prove fear justified. She would not give them that. Inside, something hardened. Not anger. Resolve. She would finish teaching them how to think, no matter the cost, because unexamined belief had already cost the galaxy too much. She stood at the center of a quiet storm. Teacher, observer, questioner. The Order still called her Jedi, but the Force already knew. She was becoming something else. The Council chose silence over accusation. Silence preserved order. Accusation invited fracture. They believed patience could correct her. They believed her time would soften ideas. Quietly, carefully, without conflict. Her students were reassigned slowly, one at a time. No announcement, no explanation. Teaching hours shortened. Permissions narrowed. Would not give them that. Her chambers would not give them that. Her chambers emptied. Footsteps faded. Questions followed the students elsewhere. But ideas did not leave so easily. Ideas lingered. They waited. The council remembered history. Schisms born from thought. Wars born from certainty. They feared the pattern repeating. Independent minds led to collapse. Collapse scarred the Force. At least, that is what they believed. She felt the Force watching, not guiding, not correcting, observing, as it always had. Distance hardened into clarity, clarity without comfort, knowledge without reassurance. She understood something then. The Order could never allow the question to mature. Questions reshaped structures. Some structures held power. Power relied on certainty. Fear drove their caution. Fear of loss. Fear of chaos. Fear of history repeating itself. She did not despise them. She understood fear well. Fear shaped institutions, just as blades shaped wars. Isolation followed naturally. Conversations ended. Trust thinned. Glances grew careful. Silence grew heavier. Inside her, resolve sharpened. Not anger, not hatred. Purpose. The Force remained immense, ancient, unmoved. It did not judge morality, only outcome. Lives were currency. Balance was paid in suffering. She no longer sought approval from it. Silence was not guidance. Silence concealed cost. She began preparing quietly, not for rebellion, for separation. Separation of belief from obedience, of thought from surrender, of understanding from faith. This preparation was lonely, but honest, and honesty mattered more than belonging. The council debated without her. They spoke of caution, of tradition, of stability. They decided her influence was dangerous, final. She did not plead. Explanation. Final. She did not plead. Explanation invites negotiation. Negotiation invites doubt. Institutions fear doubt. She waited instead, composed, observant, prepared, ready to accept consequence, without bitterness, without regret. The fracture within her became final, a line she would not cross back, toward unquestioned obedience, toward blind faith, toward surrender. The temple felt smaller, walls closer, echoes heavier. Judgment pressed inward. She remembered the child who listened, the questions without names, the patience that carried her here. Nothing ended yet. Endings were forming, quietly, through repeated choice, through restraint, through refusal to surrender understanding. This was the last moment she belonged fully to the Jedi Order, before distance became doctrine, before separation became identity. Long before the galaxy would know Darth Traya, the choice was complete, accepted, owned, made without spectacle, made without witness. A quiet decision that would echo across the galaxy. He arrived without ceremony, no prophecy, no omen, just presence. A student who listened more than he spoke. She noticed him early, not because of strength, because of attention. He absorbed lessons quietly, not memorizing, understanding. That mattered to her. She had taught many, trained dozens. Most repeated doctrine. He questioned structure, silently, respectfully, dangerously. His name was Revan. At first, he was only curious. Curiosity became discipline. Discipline became confidence. Confidence became resolve. She guided him carefully, not toward rebellion, toward awareness. She spoke of consequence, of responsibility, of history repeating itself. He listened, too well. He studied conflicts the Order avoided, ancient wars, forgotten defeats, the cost of hesitation, the price of blind obedience. She never told him to disobey. She never told him to challenge the council. She only asked him to think. Thinking changed him. He began to see the Republic clearly, its weakness, its slow decay, bureaucracy masking fear, fear disguised as patience. When the Mandalorians advanced, the Order hesitated. Questions. Why wait while people suffer? Questions. Why wait while people suffer? Why trust balance that allows destruction? Why must obedience come before action? She answered carefully. She warned him of certainty, of acting without seeing the end. She spoke of consequence. He listened, but something else was forming. Resolve sharpened by impatience. Compassion hardened into urgency. She felt pride and fear. She followed him. Not because he commanded, followed him. Not because he commanded, because he understood them. She watched him gather allies, Jedi who felt the same unrest, the same pressure, the same silence from the Force. She did not stop him. She could not. He believed he was doing what the Jedi would not, what the Force refused to clarify. She saw the fracture forming, between intent and outcome, between action and consequence. The war began without blessing. Revan led, decisive, brilliant, relentless. The galaxy responded. Victory followed. At a cost. She felt it through the Force. A tightening, a narrowing path. Revan was changing, not falling, transforming. War rewarded certainty. She punished restraint. She sensed his methods darkening, not from malice, from necessity. At least, that is what he believed. She remembered her lessons, thought without surrender, choice without obedience. She realized too late. She had given him the tools, but not the limits. The Mandalorians fell. The Republic survived. Revan did not return the same. He cast. Long before the galaxy would name cast. Long before the galaxy would name it. The war did not begin with banners. It began with frustration, with waiting, with worlds burning while councils debated. Revan did not call it rebellion. He called it necessity, action in the face of silence. The Jedi Council called for restraint, balance, and patience. The Force would guide events. Revan no longer believed that. He had listened too closely, learned too deeply. He saw delay as complicity. She felt the shift before it happened, a tightening in the Force, a narrowing of choices. War was becoming an answer, not a failure, an answer to questions no one else would face. The Mandalorians advanced without mercy. Cities fell. Civilian worlds shattered. Strength decided survival. Compassion died quietly. Revan chose to meet them, not as a Jedi Knight, as a commander. Others followed, not ordered, drawn by clarity, drawn by certainty. She watched from the temple, not powerless, unwilling. The council forbade intervention. Revan disobeyed. He believed obedience had failed. The Force did not stop him. That silence mattered. The war unfolded brutally. Revan adapted, learned from the enemy, used their tactics, their ruthlessness, their fear. Victory followed efficiency. Efficiency demanded sacrifice. She felt each choice ripple outward. Lives saved, lives lost. Balance recalculated without mercy. Revan justified every decision. He believed outcome mattered more than purity. The Force did not argue. It allowed. She sensed pride growing, not arrogance. Conviction. Conviction is harder to break. Battles hardened him. Each victory narrowed his path. He wore command easily. Authority fit him too well. The Jedi who followed him changed. They stopped asking permission. They stopped waiting. They trusted Raven more than doctrine, more than the Force. She felt the shadow deepen, not darkness. Focus. A tunnel narrowing toward one solution. Win. At any cost. She remembered warning him about certainty, about ends shaping means. But war does not reward caution. It rewards decisiveness. Revan became decisive, brilliant, unforgiving. He saw the galaxy as a problem to solve. Problems require solutions. Solutions demand control. She felt fear then, not for the Republic, for him. Because war does not end when battles stop. It continues inside those who command it. The Mandalorians fell, broken, defeated. The galaxy praised Revan, hero, savior. The Jedi Council remained silent. They had lost authority. Revan had proven them wrong, at least on the surface. She felt something shift permanently. Revan returned changed, not corrupted, resolved. He had tasted control, and the Force had allowed it. That realization stayed with him, and with her. War had answered his questions, but it had asked new ones, questions neither of them were ready to face. And the shadow was no longer distant. It moved with him now, unseen, unacknowledged, growing. She told herself it was pride, not arrogance. Pride shaped by years of restraint. Pride in a student who understood too much. She watched Revan from a distance now, no longer a learner, no longer waiting, He had become a force of his own. The galaxy listened when he spoke. That frightened her, because the Force listened too. She felt satisfaction first, quiet, controlled. He had proven the Council wrong, proven hesitation costly, proven action effective. Her teachings had not been wasted. That thought warmed her briefly. Then fear followed, because effectiveness does not equal wisdom, and victory does not end hunger. She sensed how the war had shaped him, not broken him, focused him. War simplified choice. Enemies become problems. Her distance from doctrine. But her distance from doctrine. But his certainty was sharper, more dangerous. She had taught him to think beyond rules. She had not taught him when to stop. That failure weighed on her. He returned as a hero, celebrated, followed, trusted. The Jedi who marched beside him believed in him. They did not see the narrowing path. They felt purpose again. Purpose is intoxicating. She saw how they watched him, awaiting direction, approval, meaning. The Force flowed strongly around him now, not brighter, heavier, as if it bent to his will. She wondered when that had begun, and whether the Force encouraged it. Pride sharpened into fear, because fear recognizes truth early, and she knew he would not surrender command, not after tasting results, not after proving the Council weak. He believed he had saved the Republic, and he was right. That made him dangerous, because being right is harder to question than being wrong. She remembered her own words: responsibility, consequence, understanding beyond obedience. He had taken them further, past restraint, past patience, into certainty. She asked herself if she could have stopped him. The answer was no, not without betraying everything she believed. Stopping him would have meant silence, compliance, blind trust in the Force. She could not do that, so she watched and waited and felt the weight of her influence settle. The Council spoke of concern. She said little. She already knew. Revan had changed the order forever. Authority no longer rested in doctrine. She understood this. She also understood. She understood this. She also understood something else. Revan would not stop. War had not satisfied him. It had taught him something, that the galaxy could be shaped, corrected, controlled. The Force had not resisted. It had allowed. That permission mattered. Her pride curdled slowly, not into hatred, into dread, because she could see the next step. Before anyone else did, she knew where certainty led. She had been walking that edge herself. Revan simply walked faster, further, without looking back. She stood alone with that knowledge. Teacher, observer, witness. The shadow lengthened, not because of darkness, because of light focused too tightly. And she understood then. This was no longer just his path, it was hers. Her influence had shaped him. His fall would shape her. That realization marked the true beginning of everything that followed. She felt it before anyone spoke the words. Not accusation, recognition. The Council did not name her mistake. They named its outcome. Revan had not merely disobeyed, he had succeeded. That was the true danger. Success silences doubt. Victory reshapes belief. The Republic stood because of him. The Mandalorians fell because of him. History would remember that. The Jedi could not erase it. They tried to distance themselves instead. They spoke of caution, of balance restored, of lessons learned. She heard avoidance in every word. They feared admitting the truth, that one Jedi had done what the Order would not. She did not defend herself, so defense would imply regret. She did not regret teaching him. She regretted believing understanding was enough. Revan returned changed, not corrupted, convinced. Conviction is harder to undo than anger. He had seen the galaxy burn. He had chosen order over waiting. The Force had not stopped him. That silence mattered more than victory. She watched him speak to the council, calm, certain, unapologetic. Others listened, some with admiration, some with fear. Authority shifted in that moment. The Jedi felt it. So did she. She realized then that influence outlives intention. A teacher shapes minds, but cannot choose what they become. That is the risk of teaching thought. The council placed blame carefully, not on Revan alone, not openly on her, but on ideas. Ideas were easier to condemn. They traced those ideas back to her, quietly, and deliberately. She accepted the weight. This was her failure. Not because Revan fell, because she had believed the Force would correct him. She had trusted silence again. That trust was misplaced. Revan did not see himself as fallen. He saw himself as necessary. That belief would carry him further, beyond the Republic, beyond the Jedi, beyond restraint. She saw the path before it unfolded. Certainty would lead him into darkness, not because he sought power, because he sought order. Order without limit, order enforced by will. The Force had allowed war. It would allow more. She understood then. This was not only Raven's failure, it was hers, and it was the Force's. Because it did not guide, it observed. Because it rewarded outcome, not wisdom. She felt something settle inside her, not despair, resolve. She would no longer trust silence. It would be opposed. Revan walked away. It would be opposed. Revan walked away from the council, confident, certain, unstoppable. The shadow followed him. She did not try to stop it. She knew it was too late. Instead, she watched and learned. Failure teaches more than victory. Her greatest student had fallen. The galaxy would pay the price, and she would carry the lesson. This was the first time she understood. The Force does not save you from your choices. It only watches them unfold. That truth would define her. Long after Revan vanished into legend, long before she would take a new name, this was the moment everything broke, and nothing could be repaired again. They did not shout. They did not accuse her loudly. The council never needed noise. Their judgment was calm, measured, final. She stood before them without fear. Fear would have meant uncertainty. She had none left. They spoke of Revan, of Malak, of betrayal, of corruption. They spoke as if words could close wounds, as if naming failure could contain it. They did not ask her why. They told her what had happened, as if she did not already know, as if the Force itself had not whispered it to her. They said her teachings had led them astray, that her questions had opened doors, doors better left sealed. They did not say her name with anger. They said it with disappointment. Disappointment cuts deeper. She listened. She always did. They spoke of tradition, of responsibility, of safeguarding the order. They spoke of balance restored. They never spoke of silence. They never spoke of the Force watching. They never spoke of their own hesitation. She saw then what they truly feared. Not darkness, not betrayal, reflection. Because reflection forces truth to look back. They removed her title first, Jedi Master, gone. Then her authority, then her voice, all without raising a hand. They spoke of exile as necessity. A wound must be cauterized, an idea removed. She accepted every word without protest. Protest would have meant belief. She no longer believed in their judgment, only their fear. They said she would leave the order, not as punishment, as protection. For them, they did not forbid her from the Force. They assumed it would remain loyal. That assumption lingered, dangerously. She bowed, not in submission, in acknowledgement. The temple had already let go of her. She felt it in the stone, in the echoes, in the way the Force recoiled, not rejecting, distancing. She turned away without looking back. Footsteps carried her through halls she once memorized, walls that had heard her questions, lights that had watched her grow. None followed. Outside, the air felt thinner, not empty, honest. For the first time, no rule guided her steps. No counsel waited to correct her thoughts. She felt loss then, not grief, release. The Order had chosen certainty over understanding. They always would. Exile was not the breaking moment. It was confirmation. Confirmation that questions have a cost, and truth demands solitude. She walked away carrying blame, not because she accepted it, because they needed someone to hold it. Revan had fallen, Malak had followed, the galaxy burned. The Order needed distance from that fire. She was that distance. As the temple disappeared behind her, she understood something clearly. The Jedi had exiled her body, but they had exiled their own doubt long before. The Force remained, silent, observing, unmoved by judgment. She felt resentment begin, not sharp, slow, like something settling into bone. Resentment toward the Force that allowed this, toward the silence that never warned her, toward the balance that demanded sacrifice without consent. This was not hatred yet. It was clarity forming. She was alone now, stripped of rank, stripped of belonging, but not stripped of memory. And memory would become her weapon. She did not leave in haste. Exile did not chase her. It released her. The galaxy opened slowly, world by world, system by system. She traveled without destination, and without purpose given to her by others. Ships came and went, ports changed, stars blurred into patterns. She listened, always listening, not to the Jedi, not to the Sith, to the Force itself. It followed her, unbroken, unchanged, still present. That disturbed her. She had expected silence, rejection, punishment. Instead, the Force remained indifferent, as if exile meant nothing to it. She moved through outer worlds first, places untouched by doctrine, people untouched by prophecy. They suffered quietly, endlessly. Wars came and left scars. The Force remained, watching. She felt it bind lives together, then tear them apart, without hesitation, without apology. No counsel interpreted its will here. No ritual softened consequence. This was the Force unfiltered. She saw famine blamed on fate, massacres justified as balance, a loss explained away as necessary. The Force never intervened. It never chose sides. It allowed everything. That truth followed her, planet to planet. She slept in cargo holds, in ruined settlements, in silence beneath broken stars. Dreams returned, not visions, memories. Revan's resolve, Malak's ambition, the Council's calm judgment. Each memory circled the same truth. Silence had guided all of it. She realized exile had not cut her off. It had stripped away filters. She could no longer pretend. The Jedi believed the Force was wisdom. The Sith believed it was power. She saw something else, indifference, an ancient current that moved regardless of who drowned. That realization hardened slowly, not into rage, into resentment. Resentment toward a system that demanded belief, yet offered no mercy, no explanation, no choice. She tried to ignore it, to meditate, to listen differently. The Force responded the same, present, cold, unconcerned. That consistency broke something in her. Not violently, cleanly. She stopped asking for guidance. She began observing outcomes instead. Where the Force flowed strongest, suffering followed. Where balance was restored, lives were erased. Always justified afterward, never before. She felt anger then, for the first time. Not loud, focused. Anger at being used, at watching generations used, at watching choice erased by destiny. Exile taught her this. Freedom revealed truth. The Jedi had wrapped the Force in meaning. The Sith wrapped it in desire. Both avoided responsibility. She would not. She felt something forming, not belief, intent. If the Force could not be trusted, it must be understood. If it could not be understood, so it must be challenged. This thought frightened her, because it felt honest. She continued wandering, but her wandering had changed. She was no longer searching for belonging. She was gathering evidence, memory, experience, pain observed without excuse. The Force followed her still, unchanged, watching, waiting. She understood then. Exile was not punishment. It was preparation. The Jedi had cast her out. The Force had revealed itself. And what it revealed would never be forgiven. Faith does not collapse all at once. It decays, slowly, quietly. She felt it happening day by day, not as loss, as erosion. Each world she visited added weight, not evidence, confirmation. The Jedi had spoken of harmony. These worlds knew only survival. Children learned hunger before hope. Families learned grief before peace. The Force flowed through them all. She was strong, uncaring. She watched parents pray. She watched nothing answer. She watched death explained as destiny. That word followed her. Destiny. A clean word. A cruel one. It excused everything. She remembered the temple teachings. Suffering has purpose. Loss brings balance. The Force knows. Out here, those words meant nothing. They did not feed the starving. They did not stop war. They did not ease grief. They only explained it away. She tried to hold on to belief, not in the order, in meaning, meaning beyond obedience. But meaning collapsed under repetition. Again and again, the same pattern, conflict, death, balance restored. The Force endured. People did not. She realized something painful. Faith required trust. Trust required care. The Force did not care. It allowed atrocity and called it balance. It allowed heroes to rise and fall, and it allowed monsters to do the same, without preference, without judgment. She felt resentment sharpen, not wild, controlled. Resentment toward being told this was good, toward being told suffering mattered only in hindsight, toward being told choice was illusion. The Jedi had taught surrender. The Sith taught domination. Both submitted to the Force, one with reverence, one with hunger. Neither questioned its right to decide. She began to question everything. Why should an unseen current decide who lives? Why should balance require endless sacrifice? Why must sentient beings obey a power that never answers? These thoughts would have condemned her once. Now they felt inevitable. She stopped meditating as the Jedi had taught. She sat without surrender, without reaching, without asking. The Force still surrounded her. It always would. And that truth angered her more. There was no escape, only awareness. She saw how belief protected systems, how faith kept people compliant, how destiny removed responsibility. The Jedi used belief to preserve order. The Sith used belief to justify conquest. The Force allowed both. That was its crime, not malice, indifference. She felt hatred forming, not yet for the Jedi, not yet for the Sith, for the Force itself. Hatred born from clarity. That frightened her, because hatred sharpens purpose. Purpose demands action. She tried to resist that pull, to remain observer, witness. But observation without action is complicity. She had seen too much. She could not return to ignorance. The Jedi believed exile would quiet her. It had done the opposite. It stripped away illusion. Faith had been a lens. Now it was gone. Without it, the galaxy looked brutal, honest. The Force remained at the center of everything. Untouched, unchanged. She understood then. If the Force could not be trusted, if it could not be reasoned with, then reverence was submission. Submission was slavery, and slavery demanded resistance. This was not a conclusion she wanted. It was one she reached, slowly, reluctantly, irreversibly. Her faith did not die in anger. It rotted in truth. And what replaced it was far more dangerous. Understanding without reverence, awareness without restraint. The seed of defiance had taken root. Exile had finished its work. The Force never left her. That was the cruelest truth. It followed her through exile, through doubt, through resentment, through clarity. She had expected distance, punishment, a severing. Instead it remained, constant, unmoved, and as if nothing had changed. That indifference broke the last restraint. She felt it everywhere, in crowded ports, in empty ruins, in suffering ignored, in survival rewarded without mercy. The Force bound lives together, then let them tear apart, without comment, without regret. She stopped pretending it was wisdom. Wisdom responds. Wisdom cares. This did neither. It acted, and allowed consequences to justify it later. She remembered every time the Jedi had said, "The Force will guide us." It never had. It had only watched Revan fall, watched Malak rise, watched worlds burn, watched the Order fracture, and now watched her. She understood then. The Force was not good or evil. It was necessity, and necessity is merciless. That realization hardened into something sharp. Resentment gave way to resolve. Resolve shaped intent. She no longer sought peace. Peace required surrender. She sought truth. Truth without reverence. Truth without excuse. She began testing the Force, not through prayer, through refusal. Refusal to submit. Refusal to ask. Refusal to accept silence as guidance. The Force did not resist. It adjusted. That terrified her, because it meant resistance was possible. The Jedi had never tried. The Sith had only bent the Force to desire. Neither had challenged its right to rule. She would. This was not rebellion against the Jedi. They were already irrelevant. This was rebellion against the system beneath everything. A system that demanded suffering for balance. A system that erased choice. A system that survived on obedience. She felt something new forming. Not belief. Purpose. A purpose colder than faith, sharper than anger. And if the Force enslaved the galaxy through destiny, then destiny must be broken. If balance required endless death, then balance was a lie. She accepted the cost immediately. Isolation, condemnation, hatred. Those were trivial prices, compared to eternal submission. The Force watched her decision. It always did. But for the first time, she did not feel small beneath it. She felt separate. That separation mattered. It meant identity was possible, meaning chosen, not imposed. She would not destroy the Force in rage. Rage was too simple. She would understand it, strip it of illusion, expose its cruelty, and if necessary, end its dominion. That thought settled calmly, without triumph, without fear. This was not darkness yet. It was clarity sharpened to a point. Exile had done what the Order never could. It had freed her mind from reverence and from obedience, from lies dressed as balance. The Jedi had named her failure. They had been wrong. Her true failure had been trust. Trust in a Force that never earned it. That trust was gone now. In its place stood intention. Unyielding, patient, unforgiving. Long before the galaxy would know her new name, she became something the Force had never faced. A will that refused to kneel. A mind that would not surrender. This was the end of exile, and the beginning of defiance. The darkness did not roar, it waited, patient, attentive. After exile, silence deepened, and for the first time, something the Force was willing to listen. It was not comfort, it was recognition. The Sith teachings spoke through absence, through pain acknowledged, through truths whispered when reverence finally collapsed completely alone. She did not seek rage. Rage was loud. She sought understanding, earned through suffering, where every wound explained itself without excuses or prophecy remaining silent. The Sith did not deny pain. They honored it. Pain sharpened awareness, stripped illusion, and revealed systems hiding behind balance and destiny, forever unchanging cold. In forgotten holocrons, she found voices unafraid of consequence, masters who broke, learned, and rebuilt themselves through ruin rather than obedience to the silent Force. They did not promise peace. They promised clarity. Clarity hurt, but it removed lies the Jedi wrapped around suffering for centuries without question or shame. She studied teachings that spoke of breaking chains, not forging them. Freedom was paid for, never granted by the Force through obedience, faith, ritual alone. Each lesson echoed her exile. The Jedi had feared these truths because they demanded responsibility without sanctuary from choice, consequence, memory failure, history, pain itself. The darkness welcomed questions. It did not judge them. It asked what she would do with answers once belief was no longer required or safe. Here, the Force was studied as mechanism, not deity. Patterns emerged. Cause followed effect without mercy. Across wars, cycles, generations, loss, hope, victory, defeat endlessly. She felt no hunger for domination. Power interested her only as leverage against inevitability, that the Force imposed upon lives without consent, choice voice appeal. Others became Sith for conquest. She became Sith for understanding. That difference defined everything that followed her steps into shadow purpose, memory time, and fate. The title was not yet spoken, but identity had begun forming, shaped by clarity and resentment together through loss, reflection, silence, choice, exile, truth alone. She felt closer to truth here than ever in the temple halls where certainty was protected and questions were taught to bow quietly and die. The darkness did not corrupt her, and it clarified her by removing hope of salvation through obedience, faith, or destined balance promised by others before now. Pain became language. Suffering became proof. Understanding replaced belief as the foundation of her path forward into darkness. Knowledge, purpose, identity, resolve, memory, control. This darkness did not demand loyalty. It demanded honesty about cost, consequence, failure, power, choice, pain, history, cycles, sacrifice, balance, destiny, control, and truth itself. She accepted that demand without hesitation, because hesitation had already burned, worlds destroyed lives, and shattered orders claiming wisdom, balance, and guidance before her eyes. The Sith path unfolded naturally, not chosen in anger, chosen in clarity after years of silence, watching suffering, excused by balance, fate, and destiny alike. This was not corruption, and it was alignment with truth as she saw it after exile. Failure, teaching loss. War, silence, observation. Memory and reflection endured. She stepped fully into darkness without kneeling to it, using it as mirror weapon lesson and path toward freedom from the Force dominion over life. The first step was complete. The name would come later when purpose required identity symbol and declaration against the Force itself, not the Jedi alone. For now, there was only listening darkness and intention forming inside her mind. Patient, focused, unyielding, unforgiving, toward false, balance, destiny, obedience, silence. Tradition, control, the Sith did not save her. They reflected her, showing what she had already become through loss, clarity, exile, teaching, failure, observation, memory, and choice. This was the beginning, and the birth of Darth Traya awaited its final name within the darkness that listened, answered, and refused to look away anymore. Pain did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded, layer by layer, like memory returning without mercy. She learned the Sith did not flee suffering. They examined it, measured it, used it as teacher. Pain stripped illusion. It removed excuses. It left only truth. The Jedi had hidden pain behind balance. The Sith exposed it. They asked why it existed, who benefited, who endured. She learned that pain sharpened awareness, not compassion, awareness. Awareness saw patterns clearly. Wars followed belief. Belief followed silence. Silence followed the Force. Pain revealed this chain. She embraced it without ceremony, without ritual. She tested herself through endurance, hunger, fatigue, isolation. Each hardship clarified thought, and each wound confirmed resolve. The Sith texts spoke plainly. They did not promise salvation. They promised understanding bought with suffering. That honesty mattered. Pain did not lie. Pain did not justify itself. It simply existed and demanded response. She remembered Raven, his certainty, his resolve shaped by war. Pain had forged him too, but he had turned outward, toward control, toward domination. She turned inward, toward analysis, toward cause and effect. That difference defined her path. Pain taught limits. Pain taught cost. Every action required payment. The Force demanded payment blindly. The Sith demanded awareness of price. She preferred awareness. She learned to sit with pain, not to escape it, not to justify it, to understand it fully. Pain became language. Each ache spoke of imbalance imposed. Each scar mapped consequence. I learned where minds failed, where belief learned where minds failed, where belief collapsed, where truth survived. She followed that path, not seeking domination, seeking revelation. Pain revealed the Force's cruelty, its indifference, its endless demand for sacrifice. She felt anger then, controlled, focused. Anger born from clarity, not chaos. Pain refined that anger. It removed impulse, left resolve. Resolve did not rush, it waited. It planned. Pain taught patience. The Jedi had feared pain. The Sith embraced it. She saw why. Fear clouds judgment. Pain clarifies it. She accepted every lesson without illusion. This path would destroy her old self. She allowed it. The old self believed in guidance. She believed in balance, believed in silence. Pain dismantled those beliefs. She did not resist. Resistance preserved illusion. Pain demanded surrender of lies. She surrendered only those. What remained was will, cold, precise, unyielding. The Sith did not comfort her. They prepared her. Pain became discipline. Discipline became weapon. Weapon became understanding. Understanding would become purpose. She no longer asked if suffering was necessary. She knew it was exploited. That truth hardened her, but did not break her. Pain had done its work. It had stripped reverence away, left intention behind. She was no longer shaped by belief. She was shaped by consequence. That was the Sith lesson, and she learned it completely. She waited before choosing a name. Names bind purpose. They create direction. She did not rush direction. The Sith texts warned against haste. Identity chosen too early becomes a prison. She watched others claim titles in hunger. Darth this, Darth that. Names built on desire. Desire demanded conquest. Conquest distracted from truth. She wanted none of it. She observed herself first. What remained after pain, after exile, after faith collapsed? There was no hunger for rule, no wish for worship, only intent, cold, focused, unrelenting. She understood then. Her war was not against the Jedi. They were already broken by fear. Her war was not against the Sith. They were enslaved by appetite. Her war was against the system beneath both, the Force itself, the chain that bound every life to suffering. the current that decided fate without consent. A name formed slowly, not spoken aloud, tested inwardly. Traya. It meant betrayal, but not of people. It had empowered her. It clarified her. It stripped her of her power. It stripped her of her strength. It stripped her of her will. It stripped her of her life. It stripped her of her soul. It stripped her of her mind. It stripped her of her heart. It stripped her of her body. It stripped her of her humanity. 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 It stripped empower her. It clarified her. It stripped away final hesitation. She was no longer wandering. She had purpose now, to expose the Force, to wound it where it hid behind worship, to break its control over choice. She understood the cost immediately: isolation, condemnation, eternal opposition. She accepted all of it. A Sith Lord was born here, but not one the Sith would understand. She did not seek apprentices. She sought outcomes, revelation, freedom through understanding. The name settled into her like armor, not heavy, protective. It defined boundary, what she would become, what she would never be. She would not kneel to the dark. She would use it, study it, turn it inward. So the Force responded subtly, not in resistance, in adjustment. It acknowledged the name. That acknowledgement confirmed everything. The Force recognized intent. even as it refused morality. That was its flaw. She embraced it. From that moment, she was no longer Traya the exile. She was Darth Traya, a Sith without hunger, a traitor without remorse, a philosopher without faith. The name was not declaration. It was acceptance of conflict to come, of suffering required, of a path without forgiveness. She did not announce herself. The galaxy would learn later. For now, she prepared, studied deeper, listened longer, waited. The birth was complete, but the war had not yet begun. She did not crave domination. That absence confused those who would later study her. Sith were meant to hunger, to consume, to rule. She did none of these. Her strength came from refusal. Refusal to desire control for its own sake. Refusal to replace one chain with another. She had watched the Sith repeat the same failure as the Jedi. Different language, same submission. The Jedi surrendered to the Force through faith. The Sith surrendered through appetite. Both allowed it to rule unseen. She would not. Power to her was not a throne. It was leverage, a tool to expose what hid behind balance and destiny. She studied Sith teachings deeply, not their conquests, their collapses. Every Sith Lord fell the same way, consumed by hunger, blinded by victory, enslaved by desire the Force happily amplified. She learned from their endings, avoided their beginning. She did not seek armies. Armies demand loyalty. Loyalty demands belief. Belief clouds judgment. She sought understanding. An understanding required distance. Distance required solitude. Solitude she already possessed. The dark side responded to her differently, not as temptation, as clarity. It stripped away comfort, removed illusion, left choice naked and exposed. She accepted that. She used the dark as lens, not as master. Pain sharpened her, but did not rule her. Anger focused her, but did not consume her. She measured every impulse, every desire, every intention. Nothing went unexamined. This, no comfort, only truth. Truth about the no comfort. Only truth. Truth about the Force. Truth about suffering. Truth about cycles that devoured generations. She accepted that her path would not end in victory. Victory implies conclusion. She sought disruption, a wound in the system itself. The Sith had always tried to rule destiny. She would try to break it. This ambition isolated her even among the dark. Other Sith sensed it. They felt no hunger in her presence, no ambition they could exploit. That unsettled them. The dark side did not reward her with ease. It tested her constantly. It pushed. It tempted. She refused excess every time. Not out of virtue, out of precision. Excess dulls purpose. She needed purpose sharp. Her mind became a blade, her will a weight. She did not rush toward confrontation. She waited, observed, calculated. The Force continued to flow. It always would. But now it met resistance, not through denial, through awareness. Awareness weakened reverence. Without reverence, control faltered. That was her advantage. A Sith without hunger cannot be baited, cannot be ruled, cannot be predicted. She became something new, not a conqueror, not a savior, a contradiction, a living question aimed at the heart of the Force. The Sith would never understand her. The Jedi would never forgive her. That was acceptable. Understanding and forgiveness were irrelevant. Only outcome mattered, and her outcome would echo, quietly, endlessly. This was the final shape of her rebirth, not crowned, not celebrated, simply defined. A Sith who sought not power over the galaxy, but freedom from the Force itself. They came to her because she was broken, not weakened, broken open. Wounds draw those who suffer. She did not call for disciples. They found her. Across ruined worlds, across forgotten wars, across echoes of pain the Force refused to heal. The first carried agony like armor. The second carried emptiness like hunger. Both believed she could give meaning to what consumed them. She understood why. Pain seeks explanation. Hunger seeks satisfaction. Neither finds it in silence. She studied them before teaching, always observing first. One was sustained by pain, not metaphorically, literally. His body endured through suffering alone. Wounds kept him alive. Agony anchored him to existence. He did not fear pain. He feared its absence. The other was worse, quieter, hollow. He consumed the Force instinctively, so not out of cruelty, out of need without end. Where he passed, life diminished. He did not celebrate it. He barely noticed. She named them students, not children, not equals. Students are reflections, and reflections reveal flaws. She taught them as she taught herself, through truth, through consequence, through pain examined, not avoided. She spoke to the one bound to agony. She told him pain was not purpose, that endurance without direction leads nowhere. He listened, but pain spoke louder. It always had. She spoke to the one bound to hunger. She told him hunger was not destiny, that consumption without restraint destroys meaning. He listened too, but hunger listened louder. It always would. She did not promise salvation. She promised understanding. That was her mistake. Understanding requires choice. They had none left. He destroyed them, or exiled them, or denied destroyed them, or exiled them, or denied their suffering. She did none of that. She named their pain. She named their hunger. Naming gives shape. Shape gives hope. Hope is dangerous. She taught them the Force was not sacred, that it could be examined, used, resisted. They absorbed this lesson differently. One used it to endure more pain. The other used it to feed more hunger. She watched the divergence form, slowly, inevitably. Her teachings removed restraint, but did not replace it with wisdom. Wisdom requires balance. Balance requires choice. They had been shaped by trauma too long. Trauma does not choose. It reacts. She saw herself in their failures. How she taught them the dark side was tool. She taught them the dark side was tool, not master. They heard permission, not warning. Pain become identity. Hunger become purpose. She felt the Force watching, unmoved, as it always was. She realized then, the Sith do not fall because of betrayal. They fall because of truth learned too late. Her students were already broken when they arrived. She had only given shape to what would destroy her. The wound that drew them to her would be the wound they widened. She did not stop teaching. She observed. She waited. Betrayal does not arrive unannounced. It grows, quietly, patiently, like everything shaped by pain and hunger. Pain kept him alive. Not hope, or not purpose. Pain. Every wound bound him tighter to existence. Every scar anchored him in the moment. She studied this carefully, because it was unnatural, and because the Force allowed it. He had died once. He remembered that. He remembered letting go, and refusing it. Pain pulled him back, again and again. She taught him that pain was not meaning, that suffering without direction was stagnation. He listened, respectfully, quietly. But listening did not change him. Pain had already replaced thought. It spoke louder than reason, louder than clarity, louder than choice. She tried to show him limits, that endurance must serve understanding, that survival alone was not victory. He nodded, agreed, and returned to pain. He believed pain proved strength, that to suffer endlessly was to defy the Force. She saw the flaw immediately. Should defiance without purpose becomes prison? Pain was no longer his enemy. It was his identity. She named him Darth Traya, not to glorify him, to define him. Names clarify truth. His truth was endless agony. He learned to bind himself together through hatred. Hatred of weakness, hatred of death, hatred of release. The dark side responded eagerly. Pain fed it. It fed pain back. A closed loop. The Force did not intervene. It never does. She tried to break the cycle. She spoke of rest, of choosing an end, of releasing the wound. He recoiled. Release terrified him. Without pain, he would vanish. Pain was all he was. She understood then. He was not learning. He was clinging. She had mistaken survival for resilience. Resilience adapts. He did not. He endured. Endurance alone is not growth. It is stagnation with teeth. She felt responsibility settle, not guilt, recognition. She had given him language for pain, but no exit. The Jedi would have destroyed him. Mercifully, she had preserved him. Cruelly, pain without purpose does not enlighten. It ossifies. It hardens into obsession. He became proof of that truth. Each battle shattered him further. Each victory reassembled him in worse shape. Fragments held together by will alone. Will driven by fear of nothingness. She saw his future clearly. An unending struggle. No peace. No end. Only continuation. She stopped trying to heal him. Healing implies hope. Hope requires choice. He had none. She shifted to observation. She learned from his failure. Pain can teach, but only when it is allowed to end. He would never allow that. The Sith praised his endurance. They mistook persistence for power. She did not. She saw the truth beneath, and a being trapped in suffering, using pain to deny reality. Reality always wins. She knew then. This disciple would not betray her out of ambition. He would betray her out of necessity. Pain demands continuation, and she represented an ending he feared. The lesson was brutal, but clear. Pain without purpose does not free. It enslaves. And she had forged that chain herself. Hunger defined him, not desire, need, an absence that could not be filled. She felt it before she saw him, a hollow in the Force, a silence that consumed sound. Life recoiled around him, not in fear, in depletion. He did not understand it at first, neither did she. The wound at Malachor had broken something fundamental. The Force had not healed it, it had shaped it. Where others felt presence, he felt emptiness. Where others drew strength, he devoured it. Instinctively, without choice, without pleasure. She studied him carefully, more carefully than the first, because this was different. Pain still implied existence. Hunger implied erasure. He did not rage, he did not celebrate destruction. He consumed because not consuming meant death. The Force fed him, and in feeding him it starved everything else. She tried to teach restraint. She spoke of awareness, of consequence, of stopping before nothing remained. He listened. But hunger is not persuaded. It is obeyed. The dark side responded violently, not with clarity, with amplification. Each feeding widened the void. Each victory deepened the need. She realized then, this was not corruption. It was dependency. The Force had created a being that required destruction to exist. She named him Darth Nihilus, not as honor, as diagnosis. He was hunger given form, and he learned quickly, too quickly, how to drain worlds, how to silence systems, how to turn life into fuel. She recoiled from the scale, not in fear, in horror. This was not power. This was extinction disguised as survival. She tried to reach him, to anchor him, to remind him of choice. Choice meant nothing to him. Hunger erased choice. There was no ambition, no vision, no goal beyond continuation. The Sith saw a weapon. They praised his devastation. She saw a warning, a being stripped of identity, of thought, of will, reduced to appetite. The Force did not resist him. It enabled him. That truth cut deeply. Pain had been a chain. Hunger was a void. Both were reflections of her failure. She had believed understanding could replace restraint. She had been wrong. Restraint must be learned before clarity. He had learned neither. He was not her enemy. He was her consequence. She felt responsibility settle heavily. Not guilt. Recognition. This was the future she feared. A galaxy where the Force created monsters and called it balance. She stopped trying to guide him. Guidance assumes agency. He had none left. She observed instead. She learned from the horror. Hunger without conscience does not seek power. It ends everything, including itself. She understood then. This disciple would not betray her for control. He would betray her because hunger consumes all. Teacher, student, galaxy. Nothing survives appetite forever. The lesson was absolute. The Force did not care what it created, as long as balance recalculated. That truth hardened her resolve. She would not forgive this system. She would expose it, even if it destroyed her, even if it destroyed everything. Our would end. Pain and hunger do not coexist would end. Pain and hunger do not coexist peacefully. They compete. They consume. They destroy what stands between them. Her disciples did not turn on her out of ambition. Ambition implies desire. They had none left. One needed pain to exist. The other needed hunger to continue. She represented an ending to both. Endings terrify those built on continuation. They struck when she no longer served their survival. Not in anger, in necessity. She felt it coming long before blades were raised. The Force shifted, not warning her, preparing the outcome. She did not resist at first. Resistance would have been denial. Denial would have meant attachment. She had none. And she allowed the betrayal to unfold, watched it, measured it, learned from it. Pain rose against her, endless, relentless. Hatred bound flesh together that should not exist. Hunger followed, silent, vast. A void that swallowed intent. She did not curse them. Curses imply regret. She felt none. This was the lesson made real. Pain without purpose, hunger without conscience, both inevitable outcomes of her philosophy. She accepted that. The Sith always speak of betrayal as weakness. She saw it as structure. A system reveals itself when pressure is applied. Her system held. Her students failed. That distinction mattered. They struck her down, stripped her of power, severed her connection to the Force. They believed this was victory. They believed they had surpassed her. They were wrong. In losing power, she gained proof. The Force abandoned her without hesitation, as it abandons all things when balance demands. That truth mattered more than survival. She lay broken, disconnected, alive, and finally certain. The Sith had not betrayed her philosophy. They had fulfilled it. Pain enslaved one. Hunger erased the other. The Force allowed both. That was the crime. She did not die. She endured, not through hatred, through will alone. A will sharpened by clarity, by exile, by failure, by truth observed without illusion. She understood then what the Sith would never grasp. Power is temporary. Understanding is permanent. Her disciples would continue, destroying worlds, consuming each other, ending themselves. She would remain, watching, learning, waiting. The lesson was complete. The Sith path led to self-annihilation. The Jedi path led to blind obedience. She had both served the same master, the Force. She had lost everything and gained certainty. That certainty became her anchor, her identity, her weapon. Betrayal had freed her from students, from power, from illusion. She was no longer Sith in their image. She was something else entirely. A witness to the system's failure, a survivor of its indifference, a mind severed from reverence. They left her believing her ended. They did not understand. This was not an ending. It was refinement, the last lesson the Sith could teach her. Betrayal is not the end of philosophy. It is the proof of it, and she would carry that proof forward, into silence, into exile once more, into a future where she would teach again, not as a master, as a reminder, that systems built on suffering always consume themselves, and that the Force was the greatest system of all. They left her where nothing survived. No witnesses, no mercy, just ruin. Her body lay broken, not dead, abandoned between moments. The Force was gone, not distant, absent. Silence pressed in where presence once lived. At first, she thought it was shock, pain numbing awareness. But pain alone could not explain it. She reached inward. Nothing answered. No current, no whisper, no guidance. The Force had let go. She understood that immediately, not with fear, with clarity. This was what it meant to be discarded. Power stripped away, connections severed, not as punishment, as recalculation. Balance no longer required her. Her body screamed, bones fractured, flesh torn. Every movement demanded will she no longer possessed easily. She tried to draw strength, habit, instinct. There was none. Pain returned in full. unfiltered, without the force to dull it. She learned something then. Pain feels different without meaning, without purpose imposed from outside. This pain belonged to her alone. She lay still for a long time, not waiting for rescue, not praying, waiting to understand. Breath came shallow, slow, measured. She focused on that. Breath was real. Breath did not require belief. Her thoughts drifted, not to regret, to observation. She measured sensation, cold stone, ragged air, blood pooling, time passing, all without interpretation. Existence reduced to fact. This was life without the force. No destiny, no balance, no justification, only consequence. She tried to move. Pain answered immediately, clear, honest. She welcomed it. Pain meant she remained, not because of prophecy, because she chose not to end. She dragged herself forward, and inches at a time. Every movement deliberate, every pause calculated. No power carried her. No unseen hand lifted weight. Her body learned truth quickly. Survival required effort. Effort required intent. Intent replaced faith. She remembered the Sith, pain as teacher. Now the lesson was complete. Pain taught without amplification, without reward, without promise. She crawled, stopped, breathed, moved again. Each action her own, each success earned. She felt smaller, not diminished, defined. She realized something profound. Without the force, she was free from explanation. Nothing happened for a reason. Things happened because they did, and she responded. That simplicity grounded her. The Jedi had never known this. The Sith had never accepted it. Both relied on power to escape consequence. She could not, and she did not want to. And hours passed, or days. Time lost meaning without guidance. She measured it in breaths instead, in heartbeats, in moments survived. Eventually she stood, barely. The world spun. She waited until it stopped. Standing was victory enough. She laughed then, not loudly, briefly, because she understood. The Force had abandoned her, and in doing so, it had revealed itself completely. She was alive, not because the Force allowed it, because she refused to die. That knowledge settled deep, cold, permanent. She took her first step away from the place they left her, not as a Sith, not as a Jedi, as something else, broken and finally honest. She expected emptiness to break her. It did not. It clarified everything. Life without the Force was not darkness, it was weight. Every step carried consequence. Every breath required effort. Nothing eased the burden. Nothing explained it away. She felt hunger now. Real hunger. Not the symbolic kind. Not hunger dulled by meditation. Her body demanded food, water, rest. The Force had never demanded these honestly. It had always softened need, turned survival into abstraction. Now there was no abstraction. Cold burned her skin. Heat drained her strength. Injury healed slowly. Pain lingered. Time mattered. Mistakes mattered. She learned to listen to her body, not as weakness, as truth. The Jedi had called the body an illusion. The Sith had called it a tool. Both were wrong. The body was fact. Fact does not lie. She moved through settlements unnoticed, not cloaked. ignored. No presence announced her arrival. No force ripple followed her steps. People passed without sensing anything unusual. For the first time in her life, she was invisible. That invisibility taught her more than power ever had. She watched people live without destiny. They worked, they suffered, they loved, they died. Not because the Force willed it, because life is fragile, simple, unfair. She saw kindness without prophecy, cruelty without dark rituals, choice without guidance. The Force had claimed authorship over all of this. Now she saw the lie. People acted without it. They always had. The Force only took credit afterward. She slept on hard ground, in abandoned rooms, in corners no one cared about. Sleep came unevenly. Dreams faded. Visions stopped entirely. That silence was terrifying at first, then relieving. No future pressed into her mind. No warning shaped her decisions. Only present need. Only now. She made mistakes. Simple ones. She misjudged distance. Overestimated strength. Before failure became final. It stole before failure became final. It stole lessons by rescuing outcomes. Now failure taught fully, cleanly. She learned patience without meditation, focus without chanting, discipline without doctrine. Every habit was earned. Nothing was gifted. She understood then. The Force had made her dependent, not empowered. Dependence is not guidance. It is control disguised as benevolence. Without it, she was slower, weaker, but honest. Honesty replaced speed. Awareness replaced power. She stopped thinking in grand patterns. No balance, no destiny, no cycles. Just cause, then effect, again and again. This was life stripped to its core. And it worked. She survived. Not because she was chosen, because she adapted. That realization settled deeply. The Force had never been necessary. It had been convenient. And convenience had hidden truth. She felt anger then. Not explosive, focused. Anger at years stolen, at lessons delayed, at dependence mistaken for wisdom. She did not reject the Force emotionally. She dissected it intellectually, coldly, methodically. What cannot survive scrutiny does not deserve reverence. She knew now. Existence without the Force was not lesser. It was clearer. And clarity terrified systems built on mystery. She walked on, stronger in ways power never provided, unseen, unguided, awake. Silence changed shape. At first it felt empty, then it became sharp. It cut away excess thought, left only what mattered. Without the Force, nothing answered her questions, and so she answered them herself, slowly, carefully. She learned to think without echoes. No visions, no warnings, no unseen pressure guiding choice. Every decision belonged to her alone. That weight sharpened her will. Will replaced instinct. Instinct had once relied on power. Now power was gone. Only judgment remained. She examined her past with new clarity. The Jedi, their calm certainty, their fear of doubt. The Sith, their hunger, their surrender to desire. Both had listened to the Force more than to consequence. She had done the same, until it abandoned her. Silence taught her something essential. Guidance weakens judgment. When answers arrive unearned, thought grows lazy. The Force had trained obedience, not wisdom. She understood now why betrayal felt inevitable. Systems that remove choice eventually remove responsibility. Weighted. Anger that calculated. Anger that waited. Anger that calculated. Anger that did not need release. She let it remain. Anger can be tool. Silence honed it. She stopped measuring herself against past identities. Jedi, Sith, teacher, master. Those names meant nothing now. She was defined by function, observation, analysis, choice. She listened to conversations around her. People spoke of fate, of luck, of destiny. She heard old lies repeating themselves. The Force had trained the galaxy well. Even without sensing it, people excused suffering as inevitable. She saw the pattern clearly. Belief spreads without power. Control does not require presence. It requires acceptance. That realization deepened her resolve. The Force did not need to act. It had already shaped thought. She considered her students, pain, hunger, betrayal, all outcomes of unexamined belief. She had taught them to see, but not to choose restraint. That failure mattered. Silence allowed her to accept it fully. No excuse softened the truth. No prophecy reframed it. She failed them and learned from it. Learning did not bring comfort, it brought clarity. She walked more steadily now, her body still weak, her mind precise. Every action deliberate. No wasted movement, no wasted thought. Silence became discipline. It demanded focus. It punished distraction. She welcomed that. She no longer feared being alone. Aloneness removed distortion. Without voices guiding her, she heard herself clearly. She tested ideas internally, challenged conclusions. She was proof. She understood now. Her hatred was proof. She understood now. Her hatred was not emotional. It was reasoned, measured, earned. Hatred built on understanding lasts longer. She did not plan revenge. Revenge requires fixation. She planned correction. Correction requires patience. Silence taught patience better than power ever had. She began shaping purpose again. Not around dominance, not around destruction, around exposure, to show what the Force truly was, not savior, not villain, a system that demanded obedience and offered no accountability. Silence sharpened her intent, removed illusion, left resolve intact. She was broken, yes, but not empty. Silence had filled the gap with will, and will would carry her forward. And hatred is often loud. This was not. This hatred was quiet, measured, constructed carefully over time. It did not burn. It endured. She did not curse the Force. Curses waste energy. She examined it instead, coldly, without illusion. She asked what it was, not what it claimed to be, not what others believed, what it did. Everywhere she looked, the pattern repeated. Power flowed, suffering followed, balance restored. No apology, no explanation. The Force never asked permission. It never accepted blame. It simply recalculated. That was its cruelty, not malice. Indifference. She had once believed indifference meant neutrality. She was wrong. Indifference chooses outcomes without care. Care is what gives morality meaning. The Force had none. That truth did not anger her. It convinced her. Hatred built on reason does not rush. It waits, and it plans, it remembers. She did not want to destroy the Force in rage. Rage fades. She wanted to expose it, to remove the mystery. Mystery protects power. Understanding weakens it. She understood that now. She had lived without the Force. She had survived without destiny. That alone proved something important. The Force was not necessary. It was dominant. Dominance is not truth. It is habit enforced over time. She saw how beings obeyed without knowing why, how suffering was accepted as balance, how loss was praised as growth. These ideas did not come from nowhere. They came from centuries of guidance unchallenged. She did not blame the Jedi anymore. They were servants who believed themselves guardians. She did not blame the Sith either. They were servants who believed themselves masters. Both knelt. Both obeyed. And idols replace thought. She would idols replace thought. She would teach again. Not power, not conquest. Awareness. She would show others what the Force demanded, what it took, what it erased. Not through sermons, through experience. Experience does not argue. It reveals. She accepted the cost fully. Isolation, misunderstanding, condemnation. Those were minor prices compared to eternal obedience. She had no illusions left. She knew this path would fail. All paths do. But failure would teach more than success ever could. The Force thrived on cycles. She would disrupt them, even briefly, even partially. Disruption leaves scars. Scars remember. She felt no need to hurry. She had both. The Force still surrounded her. She was a Jedi. 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 She was a She was a She was a She was a Jedi. 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 She was a She was a Jedi. 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 She was a Jed. She was a Jedi. She was a Jedi. She was a Jedi. She had both. The Force still surrounded her. It always would. But it no longer defined her. That was the difference. She was not silent anymore. She was listening and preparing. This was not the end of her breaking. It was its completion. From this point forward, every choice would be deliberate, every lesson intentional, every failure instructive. She had lost power, lost students, lost belief. What remained was will. And will, once freed from reverence, does not bend easily again. She felt it before she saw her. Not a ripple, not a surge, an absence that moved. Footsteps without echo, breath without current. The galaxy did not react. The Force did not stir. That was wrong. Everything alive leaves a trace. Everything touched by the Force bends it slightly. This presence did not. It passed through the world like a scar, silent, enduring, unexplained. She stopped walking, not from shock, from recognition. This was not emptiness. This was survival. A being who had been cut away and remained. She watched from the shadows. Old habit, careful habit. The figure moved cautiously, not weak, measured. Every step chosen. No instinct guided by prophecy. No future pressing from ahead. Only now. Only consequence. She knew that feeling. She had lived it, briefly. This one had lived it for years. The Force remained silent around her, not severed by death, not consumed by hunger. Simply gone. That terrified her, not because of danger, because of implication. The Jedi taught that separation was death. The Sith taught it was impossible. This being contradicted both. She followed at a distance, watching interactions, listening to speech, observing choice. The exile did not hesitate because of fear. She hesitated because she measured cost. That distinction mattered. People spoke to her without reverence, without sensing anything special. She did not inspire awe. She inspired trust. That was rarer. Trust without mysticism. Trust without destiny. She saw scars, not just physical. Decisions etched into posture. Loss carried quietly. No need to explain. No need to justify. The Force had not shaped this life. Choice had. She felt something tighten inside her. Not anger. Hope. Hope was dangerous. She had killed hope before, buried it under clarity. But this was not illusion. This was evidence walking. The exile had been cast out, condemned, silenced, just like her. But where Traya had turned inward, this one had kept moving, living, adapting, enduring without guidance. She saw herself reflected, and something more. This being did not hate the Force. She simply lived without it. That difference mattered. Hatred implies fixation. This was freedom. She watched the exile sleep. No dreams, no visions. Just rest. Honest rest. The Force did not intrude, did not whisper, did not claim ownership. She felt anger then. Cold, focused. Not at the exile, at the lie she had been taught, that survival required submission. that meaning required guidance. The exile disproved it by breathing, by choosing, by continuing. She stepped closer, carefully, letting herself be seen, not as teacher, not as master, as witness. The exile looked at her. No recognition, no fear, just curiosity. That gaze carried weight, not power, experience. They spoke briefly, simple words, no doctrine, no destiny. Traya listened more than she spoke. She always did. The exile spoke of loss, of exile, of being abandoned by everything that once defined her. Not bitterly, factually. Traya felt something fracture again. Not pain, certainty. She had believed hatred was necessary. That opposition gave shape. The exile needed neither. She existed without narrative, without war against the Force. She simply refused to depend on it. That was more threatening than rebellion. Traya understood immediately, quietly, without announcement. This being, quietly, without announcement, this being would be observed, tested, learned from, not as student, as proof. If one life could exist without the Force, then the galaxy did not need it. That truth would destroy everything. She followed the exile into the night, no longer hiding, no longer alone. For the first time since exile, Traya did not feel defiance. She felt possibility, cold, sharp, unforgiving, and real. She learned the name slowly, not from prophecy, from consequence, from scars that spoke without words. Maître Surik, the Jedi exile, cast out for an act no doctrine could forgive, an act no prophecy could soften. Malachor had broken many. It had hollowed this one, and she had kept walking. The Jedi spoke of severance as death. They were wrong. Death is stillness. This was motion. The Sith spoke of severance as impossible. They were wrong as well. Impossibility is comfort for the uncurious. Maître moved without guidance, without echo, without the constant pressure of the Force shaping choice. Every step was earned, every mistake remembered. Traya watched her speak with strangers. No aura preceded her words. No presence demanded attention. People listened anyway, because she listened first. That pattern repeated, again and again. Trust grew where power did not. Traya felt unease, not fear, recognition. This was the path she had theorized, but never seen. A being cut away, and still whole. Mitra did not deny the Force. She did not curse it. She did not worship it. She treated it like weather, just present elsewhere, irrelevant to the moment. That indifference cut deeper than hatred. Hatred still orbits its object. Indifference escapes gravity. Traya followed her across ruined systems, battlefields where echoes lingered, refugee camps where hope was thin, ports where survival was negotiated daily. Metra adapted, not with power, with judgment. She chose when to fight, when to flee, when to speak, when to remain silent. No unseen hand corrected her timing. No vision warned her away. Consequences arrived honestly, and she accepted them. Traya felt a quiet ache, not envy, loss. Loss for the years spent listening to silence that claimed authority. Maître carried guilt. That was clear. But it did not paralyze her. Guilt informed her restraint. It sharpened care. She avoided unnecessary harm, not because balance demanded it, and they had failed. Contradictions endure. They had failed. Contradictions endure when truth sustains them. Traya approached carefully, not as master, not as savior, as companion in exile. They spoke of Malachor, briefly, no details offered freely. Some wounds remain private. Maitra did not seek absolution. She did not seek understanding from the Force. She sought to keep moving. That simplicity stunned Traya. Simplicity terrifies systems built on complexity. The Force thrives on interpretation. Mitra offered none. She lived. That was enough. Traya began to test her, subtly, with questions, with silence, with difficult choices placed gently in her path. Metra did not look to the sky for answers. She weighed options, accepted cost, chose. The Force did not intervene. It never does when its authority is ignored. Traya felt confirmation settle, heavy, inevitable. This being was not anomaly. She was outcome, a result of survival without guidance, a life that disproved necessity. Traya felt resolve return, not rage, purpose. If Metra could exist without the Force, then the Force had lied. If the Force had lied, it could be challenged. Metra became more than exile. She became evidence. Walking, breathing, choosing. Traya understood then. This was not mentorship. It was experiment, not cruel, necessary. She would guide without guiding, teach without commanding, observe without interfering. If the exile endured, the truth would be undeniable. Traya did not smile. Truth does not bring comfort. Her remained unaware, for now. But a fault remained unaware, for now. But a fault line had opened, quiet, deep, irreversible. Traya did not announce herself as teacher. She had learned what titles do. They invite obedience. Obedience weakens choice. So she walked beside the exile instead, listening, observing, allowing silence to do the work power once did. She framed situations carefully, not traps, reflections, moments where choice mattered more than outcome. She watched how Metra responded, not with instinct, with memory, with caution shaped by loss. That mattered. The Jedi acted on ideals. The Sith acted on desire. Metra acted on consequence. Traya placed questions gently, never demands, never commands. Questions that required judgment, not faith, not prophecy. Mitra answered slowly, sometimes incorrectly, always honestly. Traya allowed mistakes. Mistakes teach what guidance erases. They moved through conflicts that should have drawn the Force. It did not. Where Traya expected intervention, there was none. Where prophecy should have spoken, silence remained. The exile adapted anyway. Traya felt something rare, not triumph. Relief. Relief that she had not been wrong. Relief that existence without the Force was not theory. It was practice. She tested limits, placed Mitra near relics, ancient sites heavy with history, places where the Force screamed to be heard. Mitra felt nothing, no call, no temptation, only awareness of danger. That absence was louder than any vision. Traya realized then, the Force had lost leverage, and it could not tempt what no longer listened. She began to speak more openly, not of destruction, of exposure. She explained patterns, how the Force rewrote memory, how it justified suffering after it occurred. how it rewarded obedience and punished refusal. Metra did not argue. She considered. That consideration mattered more than agreement. They disagreed often, quietly, without anger. Metra resisted the idea of ending the Force, not out of faith, out of fear of harm. That fear was honest. Traya respected it. She did not correct it. Correction is control. She wanted understanding to emerge naturally. They encountered those broken by belief. Former Jedi, disillusioned soldiers, civilians crushed by wars justified as balance. Metra helped them without doctrine, without speeches, through action. Traya watched outcomes unfold. Her lives improved, not because destiny aligned, because choices were careful, limited, human. Traya felt something close to satisfaction, not joy, confirmation. She pressed further, asked Metra to lead, to decide without consultation. Metra hesitated, then accepted responsibility. Leadership without guidance is heavy. She bore it anyway. Mistakes followed. People suffered. Metra did not excuse it. She owned it. That ownership mattered more than success. Traya had taught many students. None like this. This was not molding. It was witnessing growth without interference. The Force remained distant, uninvolved, as if aware it was not needed. That absence unsettled Traya more than presence ever had. It meant her goal was possible, dangerously possible. She began to see the end of her philosophy. Not destruction, release. She had a galaxy, choosing without unseen pressure. Mitra challenged her then, asked why hatred was necessary, why exposure required ending. Traya answered honestly, because systems defend themselves, because mystery protects power, because the Force would never allow consent. Mitra listened, did not accept fully, but understood. Understanding without agreement was enough. That was the experiment's success. Traya realized she was no longer testing Metra. Metra was testing her, testing whether conviction could exist without domination, whether belief could survive challenge. Traya adjusted, allowed her certainty to be questioned. That concession mattered. It proved this path was not tyranny, it was inquiry. Together they walked toward greater conflict, not as master and student, as variable and constant, one shaped by silence, one shaped by defiance. The Force watched from afar, unable to intervene, unable to guide. That impotence was new, and it terrified Traya, because it meant the experiment was working, and what worked could not be undone easily. Traya had sought proof for years, not belief, not theory, proof that could not be argued away. Mitra became that proof without trying. She did not announce herself as contradiction. She simply existed. The Force did not claim her, did not guide her, did not correct her. And still, she endured. They walked through places where destiny once screamed, ancient ruins, battlefields soaked in echoes, sites where the Force had shaped history. Nothing answered Metra. No call, no warning, no demand. Traya felt something shift permanently. This was not resistance, this was irrelevance. So the Force cannot dominate what does not listen. That truth settled slowly, heavily. Traya observed outcomes carefully. Meitra helped others, not because prophecy required it, because harm was visible, immediate, personal. Lives changed around her, not dramatically, quietly. Suffering lessened, trust formed. None of it traced back to destiny. It traced back to choice. Traya compared this to her past teachings, to students shaped by pain and hunger. They had listened too closely. They had obeyed systems instead of conscience. Maitra obeyed neither. That frightened Traya, not because it threatened her philosophy, because it completed it. If proof exists, action becomes obligation. She tested further, placed Maitra in moments where the Force should have intervened, where catastrophe loomed, where history expected correction. Nothing happened. Maitra chose, sometimes wisely, sometimes imperfectly. People lived, some suffered, but no unseen hand adjusted outcome afterward. There was no balance restored, only consequences faced. Traya felt satisfaction harden into resolve. The Force was unnecessary. Worse, it was obstructive. It removed responsibility by rewriting meaning later. Maitra never rewrote meaning. She carried it. That weight bent her, but did not break her. Traya recognized the difference. Strength without absolution. Endurance without justification. This was what sentient life truly was. She understood now why the Force hated this path. Not emotionally, structurally. Systems collapse when alternatives function. Maitra was an alternative, a living one. Traya spoke less, watched more, allowed the truth to speak for itself. Maitra questioned her often. She challenged conclusions, feared consequences. Traya accepted. Those disagreements mattered. They proved this was not indoctrination. Indoctrination demands agreement. Inquiry welcomes resistance. Traya adjusted her thinking, refined it, removed excess certainty. This mattered. It proved her path was not another tyranny. It was exposure. If the Force could not tolerate scrutiny, it did not deserve reverence. She prepared for the endgame quietly. Not destruction, demonstration. The galaxy would see, not through speeches, through absence, through lives lived without guidance, through survival without destiny. Mitra would not be weapon. Weapons are consumed. She would be witness. Witnesses endure. Traya accepted that her role was temporary. Philosophies end with their teachers. Proof outlives them. Mitra would continue, with or without Traya. To hear, to contradiction made flesh. To hear, to contradiction made flesh. To proof that could not be silenced. The Force remained around them, distant, uneasy, unable to intervene without revealing itself. That restraint pleased Traya. It meant fear. Fear of being seen clearly. She had achieved what no Sith sought, what no Jedi dared imagine. A future where the Force was optional, where choice carried full weight, where meaning was not assigned afterward. Maitra slept nearby, resting without dreams, without visions. Just rest. Traya watched her breathe. Simple, unremarkable, revolutionary. She understood then. This experiment was complete. The answer was undeniable. The galaxy could exist without the Force. And once that truth existed, it could never be erased. Traya closed her eyes, not in prayer, in preparation. What came next would be violent, not because she wished it, because systems defend themselves. But the outcome was already written, not by destiny, by proof. And proof, once lived, cannot be undone. The world remembered the wound. Malachor always did. Stone carried memory better than flesh. Every step echoed with decisions never forgiven. The sky hung low, broken, Ash drifted like slow snowfall. Nothing here healed. Nothing here forgot. She felt it before the ground came into view. Not through the Force, through history, through consequence. This place was not cursed. It was honest. The echo of the mass shadow generator still lingered. Not as sound, as absence. Life had been erased here deliberately. Choice had been made, and the galaxy had continued anyway. She walked carefully, not from fear, from respect. Malachor was where belief collapsed, where obedience failed, where the Jedi learned too late that balance does not care who it consumes. She had stood on this world before, as teacher, as observer, as witness to devastation. Now she returned stripped of illusion. No power flowed here for her, no guidance whispered, only the weight of memory pressed down. She welcomed it. The exile followed behind, silent, alert, unshielded by destiny. This place should have crushed her. It did not. That alone proved everything. The Jedi had taught Malachor was a scar in the Force. They were wrong. It was a scar in belief. A moment when obedience killed more efficiently than hatred ever could. She stopped near the shattered surface. Fragments of ancient weapons lay half buried, remnants of a war that claimed righteousness. She did not speak immediately. Silence mattered here. Words rushed would cheapen truth. The exile looked around. No reverence, no fear. Just recognition. Recognition of cost. Traya felt a strange calm. This was where everything ended, and where everything began. She remembered the scream, the sudden pull, the way the Force had surged and then recoiled. Thousands of lives erased in an instant. Not because of anger, because of calculation. Because someone decided the war must end. The Force had allowed it. That was the lie. Not that it caused the massacre, that it pretended innocence afterward. She turned slowly, looked at the exile. This place had defined both of them. One had severed herself to survive. The other had survived to sever meaning itself. They stood on opposite ends of the same decision. Traya spoke softly, not teaching, remembering. She spoke of the moment the generator fired, of the silence that followed, of how the Force screamed and then grew quiet. Not in grief, in recalculation. Balance restored, cost irrelevant. She described the Jedi Council's reaction, their horror, their fear, their decision to exile rather than understand. Understanding would have implicated them. Exile preserved their certainty. The exile listened without interruption. She had heard these stories before, but never framed this way, never stripped of justification. Traya walked closer to the edge, looked down into the fractured depths. This was where destiny had been challenged accidentally, and the Force had answered by abandoning everyone. She explained calmly that Malachor was proof that the Force does not guide. It permits. It corrects afterward. It calls the result balance. She did not accuse the exile. There was no need. Blame had no place here. This was not about guilt. It was about clarity. The exile felt nothing from the ground. No whisper, no judgment. As no call to repent. That silence mattered more than any echo. Traya continued, explaining how the Sith had misunderstood this place. They worshipped its power. They fed on its pain. They missed its lesson entirely. Pain is not meaning. Hunger is not truth. The Force had no preference between them. It used both. She gestured to the sky, to the broken horizon. This was the end result of belief unchecked. Not darkness, not light. Compliance. The exile asked one question. Quiet. Direct. Why return? Traya answered honestly. Because truth demands witness. Because endings must be seen. Because this place reveals what words cannot. She admitted something then, that she did not expect to win. Victory implies approval. She expected to fail. Failure would expose the system more completely. The exile understood that, not agreed, understood. Consequence. Malachor did not judge them consequence. Malachor did not judge them. It never had. It simply remembered. And in that memory, the truth was unavoidable. She spoke without ceremony, without venom, without the hunger that once defined Sith. This was not a declaration of war. It was an explanation. She told the exile that the Sith had always misunderstood her. They believed she sought dominance, that she wished to replace Jedi rule with darker chains. They were wrong. Power was never the point. Power was distraction. She explained that both Jedi and Sith served the same master. Not light, not dark. The Force itself. One served it through surrender, the other through exploitation. Both accepted its authority without question. She had not. She spoke of years spent listening, observing outcomes, watching wars justified after they ended, watching suffering reframed as balance. The Force never prevented catastrophe. It only explained it afterward. That was its cruelty. She told the exile that Malachor was not an anomaly. It was a pattern made visible. Every great tragedy followed the same structure: choice, destruction, silence. Balance declared. The Force did not grieve. It recalculated. She said this calmly, as if describing weather. The exile listened, still, focused. Traya continued. She said the Sith believed destruction was freedom. They were wrong. Destruction still obeyed the Force. It fed it. The Jedi believed preservation was wisdom. They were wrong as well. Preservation maintained the same system. A death of influence. A galaxy where the death of influence. A galaxy where the Force no longer shaped thought. Where destiny no longer excused suffering. Where choice carried full weight without unseen correction. She admitted this would be catastrophic. At first. Systems collapse when their foundations vanish. She did not deny that. But she asked a single question. How many worlds had already burned to preserve balance? How many lives had already been erased so destiny could continue unchallenged? She told the exile that the Force had trained the galaxy to accept pain, to excuse it, to sanctify it. Remove that belief, and suffering would no longer be tolerated so easily. She said the Force was not evil implies intent. The Force had none. That was worse. It treated all lives as equal variables, equally disposable. She explained that her hatred was not emotional, it was structural. She hated the Force because it removed responsibility, because it claimed authorship after the fact, because it demanded obedience without consent. She admitted she would fail, that killing the Force was beyond certainty, but attempting it mattered. Failure would still teach. The exile asked if she intended to destroy all those connected to it. Traya answered honestly. No, the Force would recoil, savor connections, end itself in self-defense. Life would continue, different, unguided, dangerous, honest. She said the galaxy deserved that risk, because it had never consented to the alternative. And she spoke of Mitra as proof. A life lived without guidance, without destiny, without collapse. She said the exile terrified the Force more than any Sith, because she proved irrelevance. Rebellion still acknowledges authority. Indifference does not. She explained that the Jedi would never accept this truth, because their identity required the Force. The Sith would never accept it either, because their power depended on it. Only someone who survived without it could stand outside the argument. That was why she had guided the exile, not to control her, to show the galaxy what already existed. She admitted she had manipulated events, not outcomes, perspective. She had placed mirrors where myths once stood. She did not ask the exile to agree. Agreement was unnecessary. She asked only that the exile understand, and understanding carried consequences. If the Force died, everything would change. History would end, not stop, end its pattern. No more cycles, no more chosen ones, no more balance restored after tragedy, only cause and effect. She said that frightened her too, but fear was not reason enough to kneel. She finished quietly, not with command, not with threat, with acceptance. She had spoken the truth. Whether it survived no longer mattered. The exile stood in silence. Malachor listened. The exile did not answer immediately. She had learned the cost of fast words. Silence was not hesitation. It was measurement. Malachor did not interrupt her thinking. Nothing did. That absence mattered. She looked past Traya, at the broken world, at the remains of certainty turned to rubble. This place had taken something from her once, not the Force, she had choice, and she had taken it back, slowly, painfully. She spoke at last, not in accusation, in clarity. She said she understood the argument. That much was true. She had lived proof of it, but understanding was not agreement. She said freedom without guidance was real. She had lived it, but freedom without responsibility became cruelty. Traya listened, did not interrupt. The exile continued. She said the Force had failed her, abandoned her, allowed Malachor to happen, but she refused to let that failure define all existence. She said the Force was a current, dangerous, impersonal, but not a mind, not a tyrant. She said destroying it would not free people, it would orphan them. Traya felt the weight of that word. Orphan. The exile said most beings were not prepared. They relied on meaning given, on comfort offered, and on stories that softened loss. Remove that overnight, and suffering would multiply, not lessen. Traya did not deny this. She had never believed the transition would be gentle. The exile pressed further. She said Traya's hatred was earned, but hatred still narrowed vision. Even quiet hatred, even reasoned hatred. She said Traya had been shaped by betrayal, by exile, by watching systems fail. But systems failing did not mean existence itself was invalid. She asked a single question. If the Force died, who would teach restraint? Traya answered immediately. Consequence. Consequence always teaches. The exile shook her head. Consequence teaches after damage, after loss, after death. She said some guidance prevents harm, not excuses it. She admitted the Jedi had failed at this, miserably, but failure did not negate the need. Traya felt tension tighten, not anger, challenge. This was the choice no one wanted. A galaxy guided by an uncaring force, or a galaxy unguided entirely. Traya said there was no middle ground. Systems do not share authority. The exile disagreed. She said authority was the problem, not presence. The Force became tyrant because beings surrendered judgment to it, not because it demanded worship. She said the answer was not annihilation. It was refusal. Refusal without crusade. Refusal lived quietly. She pointed to herself. She said she did not fight the Force. She ignored it, and it lost power over her. That mattered. Traya felt something strain. This argument struck deeper than opposition. It questioned necessity, not morality. The exile said if one life could live without the Force, then many could. Slowly, naturally, without catastrophe. She said Traya wanted revelation through collapse. She wanted exposure through shock. The exile wanted erosion, time, choice spreading quietly. She said systems collapse faster when attacked, but rot when ignored. Rot leaves fewer corpses. Traya considered this, silently. She had always believed urgency was required, that the Force would adapt, that it would erase alternatives if given time. The exile said, maybe. But violence would prove the Force right. It would frame opposition as threat, and beings would cling harder to guidance. Fear does that. She said Traya's plan assumed people would choose truth over comfort. She had learned otherwise. People choose comfort first, every time. Traya acknowledged this. That was why the galaxy remained enslaved. The exile responded calmly. Enslavement ends when people learn to stand, so not when chains are ripped away. She said Traya's experiment had succeeded already. Maitre Surik existed. Others would follow, not because they were told, because they saw. She said Traya did not need Malachor, did not need an ending. She needed patience. Traya felt the truth of that. And the danger. Patience meant uncertainty. It meant letting the Force continue existing, even temporarily. The exile finished quietly. She said she would not help destroy the Force. She would not defend it either. She would keep living without it, and teach others to do the same. No sermons, no wars, just proof multiplied slowly. She asked Traya one final thing, whether her goal was freedom or control over how freedom arrived. That question lingered. Malachor offered no answer, only silence. She listened as the exile's words settled into silence there. So Malachor did not answer them, but the ground remembered everything. She felt the weight of choice pressing harder than defeat. Victory had never interested her as much as inevitability itself. She admitted her plan required violence, even if unintended inevitably. Systems collapse loudly when challenged and quietly when ignored eventually. She had chosen loud collapse because patience felt like surrender. The exile's path suggested another ending, without spectacle or martyrs. Traya measured that ending against centuries of suffering permitted systemically. Permission was the Force's greatest weapon, disguised as balance alone. She feared time would allow the Force to adapt again. Adaptation had erased dissent before, by reframing tragedy as destiny. Yet the exile demonstrated adaptation fails against indifference lived daily. Yet indifference spread without banners, speeches, or commands from teachers anywhere. It required witnesses, not leaders, and examples, not doctrines alone. Traya realized leadership had always corrupted her intentions eventually deeply. Students sought certainty and turned questions into weapons against others. The exile sought uncertainty and carried questions responsibly without imposition. That difference explained everything Traya had failed to teach before. She accepted then that endings chosen in haste betray truth. Malachor demanded an ending, but not the one she planned. The planet had already proven devastation teaches nothing, enduring lasting. Survivors learn slower lessons carried through memory and restraint alone. Traya looked again at the exile breathing calmly nearby there. This being did not need Traya's sacrifice to continue forward. Sacrifice would only center Traya instead of freedom itself again. She understood the danger of becoming the final lesson alone. Martyrs inspire devotion, and devotion rebuilds the same systems again. She would not gift the Force a heroic enemy figure. Instead, she would withdraw and let proof persist quietly everywhere. This choice felt like failure to every instinct she owned. But failure had always been her most honest teacher, ultimately. She told the exile she would not force an ending. She would watch and learn as the exile continued forward. The exile nodded, accepting responsibility, without surrendering autonomy or belief. That response satisfied Traya more than obedience ever could alone. Wind moved across Malachor, carrying dust and old echoes slowly. Should no force stirred to mark this decision or resist it? Absence felt appropriate, like a witness stepping back in silence. Traya accepted that her role was now complete for now. She would fade, allowing others to choose paths freely themselves. Freedom demanded time, mistakes, grief, and learning unassisted by design. She feared what would be lost, but trusted growth eventually. Trust was new, fragile, and chosen deliberately against habit alone. They began to leave Malachor without ceremony or triumph together. Each step away loosened the planet's grip on them slowly. Traya felt lighter, not redeemed, simply unburdened by final answers. The future would be uncertain, and that was acceptable now. Uncertainty kept choice alive and prevented tyranny from returning again. She paused once and looked back at ruins one last. The exile walked beside her unled, and unbound by destiny. Together they chose continuation over cataclysmic revelation for the galaxy. Malachor remained behind a reminder, not a command, to obey. Silence followed them, not as threat, but permission to choose. Traya accepted this permission without claiming ownership or authority over. Authority would undermine everything she had learned painfully over years. The path ahead was slower, quieter, and harder by design. It would save fewer lives quickly, but fewer lost overall. Traya breathed deeply, savoring effort without guidance from any power. She had chosen restraint over spectacle and accepted obscurity willingly. Obscurity would protect the lesson better than fame ever could. They disappeared into movement, leaving theories to decay without attention. Proof would live on quietly, multiplying through example across systems. Traya felt no need to be remembered by history alone. Being unnecessary to destiny was the truest victory she knew. The force would persist, but its grip would loosen eventually. Loosening began with lives lived without listening to it anymore. Traya smiled faintly at that thought and continued walking forward. Endings were overrated. Continuations teach better lessons over long time. She left Malachor to memory, not to myth or legend. The galaxy would decide slowly, and that was enough now. Traya released the need to conclude everything herself at once. Choice returned to many hands, not one plan or vision. This humility marked the final change within her heart-mind. She accepted being wrong before being right mattered to truth. The exile walked ahead, unconcerned with credit or blame ever. That unconcern was the future unfolding quietly before their eyes. Traya followed, content to let go, at last, of control. Control had been the subtlest chain of all she wore. Breaking it felt quieter than any victory she imagined before. The road stretched ahead, unmarked and honest, without signs posted. They walked into uncertainty, choosing life over narratives imposed externally. Traya felt ready to disappear from consequence and be finished. Finished did not mean ended, only unneeded by the Force. She accepted that freedom begins when guidance ends for everyone. This acceptance closed the circle. Malachor opened long ago there. Traya exhaled and kept walking without looking back for answers. Answers belonged to living, not to systems or forces anymore. Malachor faded into distance, losing its hold on her forever. The lesson endured without monument ceremony or acclaim to mark. That endurance was the point and the promise she kept. Traya chose patience and left endings unfinished deliberately for others. Freedom grows best when not forced into bloom by hands. She believed this now with earned conviction after everything learned. The exile's steps set a rhythm she trusted to follow. Together they carried proof forward without spectacle or violence today. And so the truth moved on quietly into the galaxy. She did not fall screaming. There was no curse, no desperate grasp at survival. Defeat arrived the same way truth always had for her. Quietly, inevitably. Her body failed before her will did. Muscles weakened, breath slowed. Pain flared and then settled into something distant. She lay where the battle had ended, not looking at her opponent, not looking at the sky. She looked inward, not to the Force, to memory. She had imagined this moment many times, not as fear, as calculation. Every path ends. The only question is what remains afterward. She did not regret the choices that brought her here. Regret implies a better alternative was ignored. She had seen them all. Every compromise, every silence, every surrender dressed as wisdom. This ending was honest. The Jedi had always feared defeat. That mattered. Victory was never meant for her. Alive, breathing, carrying the weight of consequence forward. That mattered. Victory was never meant for her. Victory creates idols. Idols become chains. She had wanted something else. Understanding without worship. Choice without prophecy. She gathered her strength carefully. Not to rise, to speak. Speech was the last tool she possessed. And tools should be used fully. She spoke slowly, each word measured, not to persuade, to explain. Explanation outlives force. She said she did not blame the Jedi. Blame narrows focus. They had been shaped by the same system, rewarded for obedience, punished for doubt. They had learned to fear choice. Fear made them rigid. Rigidity made them fragile. And she said the Sith were no different. They believed they had escaped submission. They had only inverted it. Desire replaced obedience. But both knelt to the same power. The Force remained their master. She did not ask forgiveness. Forgiveness implies wrongdoing. She had acted with clarity, even when wrong, especially when wrong. She spoke of destiny, how easily it excuses cruelty, how often it rewrites memory. Suffering becomes necessary after it happens. Loss becomes lesson only once the dead are counted. The Force does not warn, it explains. That distinction mattered. She said the galaxy had been trained to accept this, to bow to outcomes, to call silence wisdom. She had refused. That refusal had cost her everything. She accepted that price willingly. She told them not to mourn her. Mourning freezes ideas in place, and ideas must move to remain alive. She said her failure was not in being defeated. It was in believing she alone must force change. Control had been her last blind spot. She admitted it without bitterness. Admitting weakness weakens systems built on certainty. She said the future would not be clean. Freedom rarely is. Choice brings mistakes. Mistakes bring pain. But pain faced honestly teaches faster than prophecy ever could. She told them not to destroy the Force. Destruction invites worship in its aftermath. She said something quieter. Live without listening to it. Let it fade through irrelevance. Systems starve when denied attention. She said that would be slower and safer and harder. She warned that people would beg for guidance again, in moments of fear, in moments of loss. Guidance feels comforting, but comfort is not truth. Patience allows others to arrive at truth. Patience allows others to arrive at truth themselves. She had not trusted the galaxy to do that. That mistrust had shaped her end. She accepted it. Acceptance was not surrender. It was completion. Her voice weakened. Breath came shallow, but her eyes remained clear. She was not afraid. Fear requires uncertainty. She had none left. She looked at the one who stood before her, not as enemy, as continuation. She said the last lesson was simple. No destiny chooses for you. No balance absolves you. Every action leaves a mark. Live knowing that. She fell silent then, not because she had nothing left to say, because what mattered had already been said, and the weight of choice left behind. She and the weight of choice left behind. She did not raise her voice when she continued. There was no strength left for that. What remained was intention, clear, deliberate. She said the last lesson was not meant to be remembered as doctrine. Doctrine hardens. It removes thought. She wanted something weaker than doctrine, something fragile enough to be questioned. She spoke of choice again, not as ideal, as burden. Choice does not promise peace. It promises responsibility. She said the Jedi had feared responsibility more than darkness, because responsibility offers no shelter, no higher will to blame, no destiny to hide behind. She said the Sith feared it too. Now they mistook domination for freedom. But domination still obeys reaction. Reaction still answers the Force. She said both paths failed for the same reason. They avoided ownership. They allowed something else to decide what pain meant. She explained that the Force does not lie openly. It reframes. It waits until suffering has already happened. Then it assigns meaning afterward. Meaning comforts. Comfort dulls memory. Dulled memory allows repetition. She said this was how wars returned, how the same tragedies wore different names, how the galaxy learned nothing except endurance. She did not speak of herself as hero. Heroes end discussion. She spoke of herself as consequence. She said her life was proof that obsession destroys even truth, that certainty can become cruelty when it refuses to bend. Shut impatience was her final failure. She had confused speed with clarity. She had mistaken urgency for necessity. She admitted she had wanted the galaxy to change too quickly. She said impatience was her final failure. She explained that freedom does not arrive through collapse. Collapse only teaches survival. Freedom requires understanding. Understanding requires time. She said time frightened her because time allows systems to defend themselves, to adapt, to erase challenges quietly. She said that fear had shaped her actions more than hatred ever did. She spoke of silence, of learning to live without answers, of accepting uncertainty without filling it with prophecy. She said silence is where judgment grows, not the absence of sound, the absence of instruction. She warned that many would beg for the Force again, especially after loss, and especially after mistakes, because guidance feels kinder than responsibility. She asked them to resist that urge, not through rebellion, through refusal. Refusal to surrender thought, refusal to let meaning be assigned afterward. She said the Force weakens when ignored, not when attacked. Attack confirms importance. Neglect starves authority. She said this path would not be celebrated. It would be lonely, quiet, often misunderstood, but it would be honest. She spoke of teaching without commanding, of showing without convincing, of living without symbols. She said symbols become prisons faster than laws. She said the galaxy would not change because she died. Change does not begin with endings. It begins with examples. She said her death was irrelevant. Her ideas would survive only if they were useful. So nothing removes pain, but pain faced. Nothing removes pain, but pain faced without justification heals differently. She said this was the difference between endurance and growth. Her breathing slowed. She paused often, but she did not rush. She said the last lesson was simple. No power chooses for you. No balance absolves you. She said if the Force still existed tomorrow, it should exist unfeared, unworshipped, unnecessary. She said that was true freedom. She said her life had been spent tearing down lies. Now she asked for something harder. Build nothing in their place. Let meaning grow naturally. Let mistakes teach fully. Let choice remain heavy. She said this would hurt, but it would be real. She said reality does not promise justice, only consequence. She said consequence is enough. Her voice faded again, not dramatically, gradually. She did not look away. She held their gaze. She said this was her final lesson, not to defeat the Force, not to destroy belief, but to stop listening when listening replaces thinking. She closed her eyes slowly, not in surrender, in completion. The lesson ended where it began, with choice. The silence after her words felt heavier than any battlefield. No Force responded. No echo answered. No destiny asserted itself. Those listening understood the burden had shifted entirely onto them. Choice stood exposed, stripped of prophecy, ceremony, and comforting narratives. She had removed the final excuse by refusing to command. What remained was consequence, patient and unforgiving, waiting for decisions. They sensed no guidance coming, only outcomes shaped by action. Fear surfaced briefly, then steadied into resolve, carried forward together. The galaxy had always preferred answers over questions at moments. Now questions demanded answers without guarantees or absolution offered freely. She believed this tension would teach better than sermons alone. Memory of her fall reframed defeat as deliberate release chosen. Others would decide paths without her shadow shaping outcomes again. That absence honored autonomy more than leadership ever could promise. She trusted struggle to refine judgment through lived experience patiently. Destiny had been convenient, but convenience breeds complacency over time. So complacency invites repetition of horrors dressed as lessons learned before. They recognize cycles break when participation ceases quietly over time. No banners rose, no crusade followed, no victory declared publicly. Only responsibility settled in, like gravity after silence returned home. Some would reject this burden and seek comfort elsewhere again. Others would accept uncertainty and grow careful, resilient together slowly. The difference would shape futures more than prophecy ever could. She anticipated misinterpretation, distortion, and resistance from institution everywhere inevitably. Institution defend themselves by simplifying truth into slogans repeated endlessly. Her lesson resisted slogans by demanding personal accountability always first. Accountability lacks spectacle, making it easy to ignore at first. And ignoring accountability carries costs that accumulate silently within lives daily. She believed lived proof would outlast any manifesto written once. Proof walks, works, fails, learns, and adapts visibly across generations. This visibility threatens systems dependent on mystery alone long term. Mystery grants authority without consent, a dangerous imbalance sustained historically. She had exposed imbalance by stepping aside deliberately and finally. Now, others must decide whether to step similarly when ready. There would be no final verdict delivered by fate itself. Outcomes would emerge through countless ordinary decisions made daily everywhere. She accepted unpredictability as the price of freedom honestly paid. Freedom without oversight feels frightening to conditioned minds initially always, and conditioning dissolves when experience contradicts taught dependency over time gradually. She trusted gradual change more than forced awakening imposed violently. Violence simplifies narratives and strengthens authoritarian responses across systems widely. Her restraint denied opponents the clarity of enemies labeled conveniently. Without enemies, systems struggle to justify coercion publicly and legally. This struggle opens space for reconsideration and reform slowly, persistently. She hoped enough space would appear before catastrophe returned again. Hope was measured, not romantic. Grounded in observation, earned painfully. Observation had taught her humility after years of certainty shattered. Humility allowed revision without surrendering core principles learned hard ways. Core principles remained choice, consequence, and shared responsibility among all. Nothing else deserved permanence or unquestioned authority ever again here. She felt peace not as relief, but alignment finally achieved. Alignment between intention and method completed her journey at last. The lesson continued without her supervision or correction thereafter alone. Alone, it would be tested, improved, or discarded by reality. Reality serves as the only honest judge remaining now always. She accepted judgment without appeal or resentment fully and freely. Resentment would tether her to outcomes she refused to keep. Letting go completed the teaching more than words ever could. The path forward belonged to many voices speaking freely now. She faded into background, allowing plurality to flourish without interference. And plurality resists capture by singular narratives imposed centrally, often violently. Violence often follows certainty, not doubt expressed loudly historically before. She left doubt as a gift intentionally and gently offered, a gift that requires care to use wisely and slowly. Care grows through practice, error, and reflection shared openly together. Togetherness formed without hierarchy or mystical sanction imposed externally, ever. This absence of sanction preserved genuine consent among participants always. Consent transforms cooperation into durable community, sustained over time reliably. She trusted communities to guard freedom collectively better than leaders. Leaders centralize risk and magnify failure when unchecked too often. Decentralized choice distributes risk and learning across lives evenly enough. Learning shared prevents single catastrophes from defining eras forever again. She hoped future eras would be gentler than past ones. Hope remained conditional on vigilance and memory preserved carefully always. Memory fades unless refreshed through honest storytelling shared publicly responsibly. Stories must resist hero worship to stay useful over time. She refused hero status by stepping away decisively and quietly. Quiet endings deny myth the oxygen it craves most desperately. Myth had fueled endless cycles she opposed for decades past. Opposition now took the form of absence, deliberate and strategic. Strategic absence undermines control more effectively than attack ever could. She trusted this subtlety to persist beyond her lifetime alone. And persistence outlives personalities, and moments shaping futures quietly thereafter long. Her work was complete precisely because it continued without her. Completion does not require closure when momentum exists independently sustained. She surrendered authorship to collective experience freely and fully now. Collective experience corrects errors faster than authority imposed from above. Above all, she valued correction over validation earned publicly, rarely. Validation comforts, correction improves, learning outcomes sustainably over time, always. She chose improvement as her final allegiance above power, forever. Power had tempted her once and taught harsh lessons learned. Those lessons shaped restraint she embraced now with humility earned. Earned humility replaced certainty as guiding virtue for future choices. And virtue here meant process, not purity achieved through effort continual. Continual effort defined freedom better than ideals imagined once before. She accepted the work would never finish entirely for anyone. Anyone could contribute by choosing thoughtfully each day onward freely. Thoughtful choices accumulate into cultural change over years slowly, steadily. She trusted accumulation more than revolution, sudden, loud, destructive ones. Thus, the lesson endured without her, alive and adaptable always. The galaxy did not end when her voice finally disappeared. It continued breathing unevenly, shaped by countless ordinary choices everywhere. Those choices lacked banners, hymns, or permission from ancient powers. Some failed quickly, causing harm without guidance to soften consequences. And others succeeded quietly, building trust where fear once ruled lives. This uneven progress defined the legacy she willingly left behind. No statues marked it, because statues invite reverence, instead reflection. Reflection remained the point, always had been from beginning start. Without her presence, debates fractured, then reformed across generations slowly. Slowness protected understanding from manipulation by those craving certainty always. Certainty promised safety, but delivered stagnation disguised as peace often. She had seen that pattern repeat until exhaustion hollowed worlds. Ending the pattern required patience stronger than any weapon wielded. Patience demanded humility, shared across communities, learning together slowly again. Again, mistakes happened, but fewer hid behind destiny afterward alone. And alone responsibility weighs heavier than blame assigned elsewhere quietly now. This weight matured judgment through lived experience, not doctrine alone. Doctrine returned occasionally, wearing softer language, but same control underneath. It failed eventually when confronted by people thinking independently always. Independence frightened institutions, dependent upon obedience for survival, long-term historically. Survival instincts triggered resistance, subtle, persistent, and often polite forms. Politeness masked coercion, making it harder to recognize immediately sometimes. She had warned about that pattern before leaving quietly then. Memory of her warning surfaced whenever comfort demanded surrender again. Again, people faced choices without counsel from myths imposed above. Above them, stars remained indifferent witnesses to consequences unfolding endlessly. Endlessly repeating cycles slowed as awareness spread unevenly outward gradually. Gradually, fear lost authority when no prophecy confirmed it anymore. Any more destiny felt like excuse, not explanation, offered freely now. Now, accountability replaced fate as guiding principle quietly within lives. Lives intersected, forming networks of shared responsibility, without hierarchy enforced. Enforced hierarchy dissolved when leadership refused permanence deliberately chosen earlier. Earlier, she had demonstrated impermanence through withdrawal rather than martyrdom. Martyrdom would have frozen dialogue around her image forever, maybe. Maybe that restraint mattered more than any spoken lesson given. And given time, communities adapted norms, supporting thoughtful dissent publicly encouraged. Encouraged dissent, reduced violence by providing release valves, socially accepted. Accepted disagreement replaced dogma in many institutions. Eventually thereafter, after setbacks occurred, because progress never moves linearly forward only vigilance preserved gains from erosion and complacency creeping back. Backsliding happened when memory faded or comfort seduced minds again. Again, stories resurfaced, reminding why responsibility matters deeply to all. All stories avoided glorifying her name deliberately for good reason. Reason demanded focus, remain on choices, not icons revered blindly. Blind reverence recreates dependency. She worked to dissolve slowly, patiently. Patient dissolution lacked drama, but sustained freedom longer-term stability. And stability emerged not as peace, but resilience under strain endured. Endured strain forged communities capable of self-correction without violence. Violence became last resort rather than first impulse, again, ever. Ever slowly, the galaxy learned to breathe unaided without instruction. Instruction, once central, faded into optional guidance offered humbly now. Now teachers listened as much as they spoke publicly then. Then learning became reciprocal instead of hierarchical transmission alone earlier. Earlier eras would have dismissed such balanced, naive fantasy only. Only experience proved its durability, under pressure, sustained, repeatedly tested. Tested values replaced slogans as measures of progress genuinely earned. Earned progress lacked celebration, but accumulated steadily over years passing. And passing years reframed her life. Not as defeat, but catalyst. Catalyst without control allowed evolution, not revolution, destructive cycles again. Again, cycles softened into spirals, trending toward understanding, slowly, collectively. Collectively, people accepted uncertainty as permanent companion rather than enemy. Enemy narratives lost appeal when curiosity replaced fear, widely spread. Spread curiosity encouraged dialogue across differences previously weaponized aggressively often. Often conversations ended unresolved but respectful enough to continue later. Later continuation mattered more than closure promised falsely by dogma. Dogma demanded endings, certainty, victory, always immediately absolute final declarations. Declarations simplified reality, enabling control by few authorities, centralized historically. Historically, decentralization reduced harm, though slower to implement widely everywhere. Everywhere, pockets of change formed, connected loosely without oversight mandated. Mandated oversight often returned with fear after crises struck suddenly. Suddenly, lessons were tested again, under stress, severe conditions everywhere. Everywhere, resilience held better than expected across systems slowly evolving. Evolving cultures honored responsibility as shared burden, willingly carried forward. Forward motion continued without her involvement or correction needed anymore. Anymore, she existed only in stories as context, not command. Command had ended with her last breath given freely away. Away from power, she finally achieved alignment between means ends. Ends no longer justified harm inflicted prematurely upon others living. So living with that restraint reshaped futures slowly across generations ahead. Ahead no prophecy waited, only work, continuous, patient, shared work. Work done imperfectly, but owned fully by many individuals together. Together, they honored her lesson by forgetting her deliberately time. Time carried memory without worship or fear dominating minds anymore. Any more freedom felt ordinary, not mythic destiny. Laden tales repeated. Repeated ordinariness was her quiet victory, earned indirectly at last. Last lessons often hide within absence, not presence, loud, ever. Ever she had sought truth beyond applause, recognition, praise given. Given none now, she rested complete within consequences, accepted fully. Fully the galaxy moved on without final answers, promised ever. Ever answers remained provisional, shaped by choices made daily onward. And onward, responsibility replaced destiny across countless lives, quietly, persistently onward. Onward no voice returned to command them again, ever after. After this silence became companion, not threat to thinking beings. Beings learned to think despite fear, lingering shadows present always. Always fear remained, but authority faded without reinforcement external sources. Sources of meaning diversified beyond singular forces, governing existence once. Once governed, now irrelevant. The force lost centrality gradually everywhere. Everywhere, life continued, messy, fragile, and free without supervision imposed. Imposed supervision would return occasionally challenged again repeatedly by choice. Choice endured, that endurance was her final legacy carried forward.